Chapter 112. The night passed and Lu Yi ended his cultivation. As he thought, after his cultivation improved, the number of spirit pills he needed to open an aperture also increased. Now that he was in the fourth order spirit stream realm, he needed to consume about 18 spirit pills to open a spirit aperture. Of course, because of the assistance of the spirit gathering spirit tattoo, this consumption was reduced correspondingly. As for efficiency, it didn't change much. With the support of the gluttonous meal secret art, his speed of refining spirit pills had always been much faster than ordinary people. He had a premonition about the consumption of spirit pills because the consumption of spirit pills increased a lot when he opened the 46th and 47th apertures. Riding on Amber, he continued on his journey. With Yi accompanying him, he was not lonely. However, ever since they left Ing Mountain, she had become mysterious. Not only would she suddenly disappear when they were hurrying along, she would also occasionally leave when they were resting at night. She was very mysterious. Lu Yi asked her but didn't get an answer, so he didn't ask anymore. Until one day, when they passed by a market and Lu Yi went in to replenish his supplies, Yi suddenly handed her storage bag to him. "Take these and sell them." "What's inside?" Lu Yi was puzzled. She took the storage bag and opened it. She found that it was filled with many strange flowers and plants, as well as some plant roots and fruits. "These are herbs." Lu Yi suddenly understood what he had been doing during this time. She would disappear from time to time. She actually went to collect medicinal herbs. "How do you know these things?" Lu Yi was curious. He didn't have this kind of ability before. Yi proudly said, "Senior sister Hua Si taught me, and Ling Yu also taught me a lot." She explained, "Hoopa can't always rely on you to raise it. It's eating more and more now. What if it eats you until you collapse one day?" "So, I asked senior sister Hua Si and Ling Yu to teach me some medicinal principles, but I don't know how many spirit stones it can sell for." "You'll know when you sell it." There were many types of herbs in the storage bag, and the quantity was not small. But it could be seen that because Yi was a beginner, the way she handled them was very rough. All kinds of herbs were piled up messily, and there were about 20 to 30 sets in total. Lu Yi smiled, "Then I'll go sell them." Yi nodded and went back into Hu Po's body. There were many cultivators in the market with their demonic beasts. However, for low-level cultivators, it was impossible for them to tame demonic beasts that were too strong. Therefore, most of these demonic beasts were used as a means of transportation. Furthermore, every demonic beast had a beast-taming collar around its neck. Most of the demonic beasts were ferocious and ferocious. There were very few demonic beasts that were as handsome as Hu Po. Therefore, as soon as Lu Yeqing appeared in the market, she attracted the attention of many cultivators. Some people even came to ask Lu Yi if he was willing to sell amber, but he refused. After purchasing a lot of food and a few sets of clothes from the market, Lu Yi brought Hu Po to the Tianji Business Alliance. After half the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, he walked out again and left the market. Riding on Hu Po's back, Lu Yi smiled and said, "Not bad. I sold it for 4 spiritual stones." Yi didn't say anything and didn't show her face. 4 spiritual stones wasn't even enough for Hu Po to chew on for a day. This guy was eating more and more now, and his consumption was almost the same as Lu Ye's cultivation. However, his growth was also very obvious. Lu Yi advised, "The harvest is really good. Wandering cultivators are all like this, slowly accumulating. 4 spiritual stones can buy 4 spirit accumulation pills. Moreover, this is just the beginning. Once you get familiar with it, it will slowly get better." Yi still didn't say anything, obviously a little autistic. She originally thought that she could sell the medicinal herbs she had painstakingly collected for the past few days for a good price, but in the end, she was greatly disappointed. Since persuasion was useless, Lu Yi didn't say anything else. The greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. The little girl was still young, so it was normal for her to be a little emotional. While throwing spirit accumulation pills into his mouth and allowing the gluttonous meal to refine them, Lu Yi took out the red lotus soaring to the sky art and studied the spell inside. He had never learned spells before, and now there was no one to guide him. He had to rely on himself to figure out everything. As he studied, he entered a state of selflessness, and spiritual power slowly surged in his body. I will find more and better herbs in the future. Half a day later, Yi suddenly appeared, sat in front of Lu Yi, and solemnly declared. Lu Yi looked up at her and smiled encouragingly. I'm looking forward to it. He clenched her small fists and said fiercely, I'll go find them now. After saying that, she jumped off the tiger's back and disappeared. Lu Yi shook his head and didn't try to persuade her. At this time, persuasion would only have the opposite effect. Yi's intention to supplement Hu Po's consumption was good, so Lu Yi let her be. On the tiger's back, Lu Yi studied the spell while urging his spiritual power. The first spell attached to the red lotus soaring to the sky art had a minimum cultivation requirement of the fourth order realm. The second spell's requirements were even higher, requiring one to reach the seventh order realm. The last spell required one to cultivate the red lotus soaring to the sky art to perfection, which was to open 180 apertures. The latter two spells were too far away from Lu Yi, so he was now studying the first spell, called Fire Phoenix. The more he studied, the more surprised Lu Yi became, because casting spells was very similar to constructing spirit inscriptions. Both required one to construct a specific pattern with one's own spiritual power. This pattern could be regarded as a closed circle, in which one's spiritual power would surge in a specific order and play a magical role. Are spells also the same as spirit inscriptions? Lu Yi couldn't help but have such doubts. Now that he was alone, there was no one to help him solve his doubts, so he could only study in silence. Fortunately, he had obtained 3 spirit inscriptions from the talent tree. Every time he obtained those spirit inscriptions, a large amount of complex information would be integrated into his mind, allowing him to completely master them. However, because Lu Yi hadn't studied them systematically, although he could easily stimulate the 3 spirit inscriptions and could even use them to fight, he was still in a state of not knowing how to use them. It was like cooking a dish. Lu Yi, as a chef, could only add various seasonings according to the various information he had obtained, and the dish he made would be delicious. However, a chef with rich cooking experience would know when to add the seasonings, how much to add, and how to control the heat. The dish he made would undoubtedly be more delicious. However, it was precisely because he had obtained all kinds of knowledge about the 3 spirit inscriptions that Lu Yi discovered after studying it that the Fire Phoenix didn't seem to be very difficult to cast. Chapter 113. Wow, what a beautiful quail! Under the night sky, Yi looked at the fat little bird in front of her. Its entire body glowed with a faint red light, and within the red light, there were faint traces of gold flowing through it. If this bird hadn't been materialized by Lu Ye's spirit power, she would have held it up. A vein popped out on Lu Ye's forehead as he corrected her. What quail? This is a fire phoenix. Repeat after me. Fire. Phoenix. Phoenix. He stared at him with an expression that said, this is clearly a quail, don't think I'm blind. Hooper also came over and lowered his head to sniff the fat bird that was flapping its wings in midair. He discovered that not only was this thing inedible, but it also seemed to be quite dangerous, so he leaped away. Lu Yi felt that he had been insulted. He had clearly studied a fire phoenix technique, but in the end, how did he come up with this thing? He checked the red lotus soaring to the heavens. There shouldn't be any problems with his method of casting and the activation of his spirit power, but where did it go wrong? How did the fire phoenix technique turn into the fire quail technique? Was this the result of studying it wholeheartedly for an entire day? Lu Yi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Among the various methods he had at his disposal, activating defensive spirit runes consumed the most energy. Sharpness was secondary. As for spirit-gathering spirit runes, they were very small. The fire phoenix technique's consumption was between defensive and sharpness. After studying it for an entire day, in addition to the dozen or so previous attempts, he finally succeeded, but the result was like this. He found it hard to accept. It was like a man who had just become a father and suddenly saw that his newborn child was incomparably ugly. He wanted nothing more than to stuff it into the mother's womb and let it be reborn. However, the result was already like this. Whether he accepted it or not, he was powerless to change it. Could this thing be used to fight enemies? He was afraid that before it could burn the enemy to death, it would make the enemy laugh to death. Alright, this is a fire phoenix. Bee saw that Lu Yi looked like he had suffered a huge blow, and said against her will, "This is a quail?" Lu Yi raised his hand, and the quail dissipated in midair. He walked to the side, took off his shirt, and began to practice his saber. As expected, spells and whatnot were all trash. Only saber techniques belonged to him. "If I study spells in the future, I'll be a pile of shit," he swore in his heart. 10 days later, a large snow-white tiger broke into a forest of mountain peaks. Lu Yi sat upright on the tiger's back, looking travel-worn. It had been more than 4 months since he set off from Mount Qingyun, but he had only spent half of that time on the road. Many times he had been delayed by various reasons. He was in a hurry to rush to the Jade Blood Sects station, so he had not stopped since he set off from Mount Ing. Right now, they were still very far away from the Blue Blood Sects encampment, but a journey of 1,000 miles began with a single step and would eventually come to an end. From the map, this area was called the 100 Peaks Mountain because there were exactly 100 mountains of various sizes. There were also 3 forces in the vicinity. Lu Yi didn't want to have too much contact with those who came from sects, so as to avoid accidentally exposing his identity, so he planned to pass through the 100 Peaks Mountain. He had been doing this all along the way, so he rarely interacted with cultivators. Although the 100 Peak Mountain covered a large area, with Hu Po's speed he should be able to cross it in a few days. He especially liked this kind of place because she could find a lot of medicinal materials in this wilderness. Ever since she had been stimulated by selling medicine that day, she had become even more diligent. At this time, on the most central mountain peak of the 100 Peaks Mountain, there stood a giant palace. Many cultivators were going in and out of the palace. In the center of the palace, a giant moon shadow plate was placed in the center. That moon shadow plate was circular and included the entire terrain of the 100 Peaks Mountain. It clearly showed everything. Not only that, it could also monitor the movements of the cultivators in the 100 Peaks Mountain and provide feedback in a direct way. On the shadow moon disk, there were 3 different colored lights constantly flashing. One was blue, the second was black, and the third was red. Each light spot represented a cultivator. The brighter the light spot, the higher the strength of the cultivator. The 3 colors represented 3 sections. They were the 3 powerhouses scattered around the 100 Peaks Mountain. One belonged to the Grand Heaven Alliance, the Green Feather Mountain. The other 2 belonged to the 10,000 Devil Mountain. They were the Supreme Luo sect and the Qin clan. The latter was a family powerhouse. Across the entire 9 prefectures, there were very few family powerhouses that could achieve great things. It was because there were great limitations for a family to develop. Of course, nothing was absolute. There were still a few families with deep foundations in the 9 prefectures. Among the 7th, 8th, and 9th stage, there were still many family powerhouses. In fact, Yu Shaodai and the Lu brothers that Lu Yi had met at the Evil Moon Valley all came from a family. Only, because they were too weak and did not have a stage, they could not resist when the people of the Evil Moon Valley came to their door. Although the Qin clan was also a 9th stage powerhouse, compared to the real 9th stage sects, there was still some difference. Fortunately, there was the Supreme Luo sect nearby and they could look after each other. Thus, the days in the spiritual stream battlefield were not too difficult. Currently, the 3 powerhouses were holding a Dragon Spring meeting. Thus, many cultivators from the 3 families had gathered at the 100 Peaks Mountain. This tradition had been going on for hundreds of years and was held every 3 years. The reason was because of the Dragon Spring hidden underneath the main hall. This was a spring water that contained a miraculous power. When the spring water gushed out, a spiritual mist would appear. When the martial artists entered it, they could refine their body and dissolve the poison of pills. To the low-level martial artists, the stronger their body, the better. Especially for those martial artists who were going to walk the path of body training, the Dragon Spring could help them establish a good foundation for their training. There were many rare resources in the Spirit Stream battlefield, such as some minerals and spirit fruits. They were all unique to the battlefield, and could not be found anywhere else in the 9 provinces. Many forces had fought each other for these resources for countless years, forming a blood feud. To the outer powerhouses like the Green Feather Mountain, the Supreme Luo sect, and the Qin clan, the dragon spring was without a doubt an extremely important resource. Initially, when the dragon spring was discovered, the Qin clan did not exist. Each time, many people would die in the competition between the Supreme Luo sect and the Green Feather Mountain. However, because the Green Feather Mountain had a stronger foundation, they won each time. Until 50 years ago, the Qin clan chose a base nearby and also joined the competition. Since they both belonged to the 10,000 Devil Mountain, the Qin clan and the Supreme Luo sect were natural allies. With 2 against 1, how could the Green Feather Mountain be their opponent? Before this, even if the Green Feather Mountain won, the power of the Dragon Spring could not be used up. It was because the number of martial artists in a sect was limited. After the martial artists of the Green Feather Mountain left, the martial artists of the Supreme Luo sect could still drink some leftovers. Although it was somewhat desolate, it was better than nothing. However, now that it was the Supreme Luo sect and the Qin clan's turn to win, the situation was different. The two sects had more martial artists than one. Every 3 years, the power of the Dragon Spring could only be accumulated. Once the martial artists of these two sects were used up, the Dragon Spring would become the same as ordinary spring water and would not have the slightest effect of refining the body. After a few times, the Green Feather Mountain had flipped the table. Chapter 114. At one of the Dragon Spring meetings 30 years ago, the Green Feather Mountain had directly invited a 6th-level sect to intervene. Of course, the result was a great defeat for the Supreme Luo sect and the Qin clan. While the Green Feather Mountain had allies, the Supreme Luo sect and the Qin clan also had allies. With the Green Feather Mountain breaking the rules first, the Supreme Luo sect and the Qin clan were not willing to be outdone. In the following few Dragon Spring meetings, the allies from all sides took the stage. Countless skeletons of martial artists were buried at the 100-Peak Mountain. After 3 or 5 times of such battles, the 3 parties realized that no one would benefit from such a battle. Not to mention the fact that the losing party would suffer great losses, even the winning party would have to share a large portion of the Dragon Spring. They would only be able to keep less than 20% of the share. Additionally, such large-scale battles could easily cause chaos and cause a large number of martial artists to die in battle. In those few Dragon Spring meetings, the 3 powerhouses had suffered much greater losses than before. If this continued, most likely the inheritance of the 3 powerhouses would be broken. In the end, with the Supreme Luo sect taking the lead, the advanced martial artists of the 3 powerhouses discussed and signed a contract under the witness of Tianji. It was that in the future, no one would seek help from allies. However, considering that the Green Feather Mountain was going to fight 2 against 1, they were allowed to gather help from nearby areas. At the same time, they limited the strength of the martial artists participating in the Dragon Spring meetings. In addition, they would give the Green Feather Mountain some preferential treatment in other aspects. It was not that the Supreme Luo sect and the Qin clan were showing weakness. Both powerhouses knew that this was the only way to ensure the continuation of their martial artists. Or else, in the 3 years of large-scale chaos, countless people would die. Clearly, the Green Feather Mountain was sensible. After signing all kinds of contracts, both parties were satisfied. Since 15 years ago, the Dragon Spring meetings had formed the current pattern. As for the help the Green Feather Mountain needed, naturally they would be the freelance martial artists from nearby areas. For this reason, the Green Feather Mountain offered generous conditions and attracted countless freelance martial artists to scramble like a flock of ducks. In the previous few Dragon Spring meetings, the Green Feather Mountain had held the advantage. Although it could not be said as a total victory, at least they had taken the majority share of the final spots. However, a few days after the start of this Dragon Spring meetings, the Green Feather Mountain had suffered great losses as they lost their mountains one after another. The 100-Peak Mountain had exactly 100 mountain peaks. In the initial contract signed by the 3 powerhouses, they had also agreed on the distribution of the share of the Dragon Spring. That was to fight for the ownership of these 100 mountains. Among the contracts signed in the past, there was a clause that granted the Green Feather Mountain certain preferential treatment. Among the 100 mountain peaks, the Green Feather Mountain had initially occupied 40 of them. Among the remaining 60, The Supreme Luo sect occupied 35 and the Qin clan 25. In other words, if this situation continued until the end of the Dragon Spring meeting, Green Feather Mountain would occupy 40% of the spots to enter the Dragon Spring, and they would be the first batch to enter. The Tai Luo sect took 35% and was the second batch to enter. In the end, the Qin clan occupied 25%. Although this distribution wasn't perfect, both sides were satisfied. However, since it was a competition, it was impossible for the Dragon Spring Association to maintain such a situation until the end. Since 3 days ago, the competition for the various mountain peaks had begun. Currently, among the 100 mountain peaks, the Green Feather Mountain occupied 35, the Supreme Luo sect occupied 40, and the Qin clan occupied 25. The main reason was that in the first few days, the Qin clan did not make any movements. It was all between the Green Feather Mountain and the Supreme Luo sect. In the main hall, there were 3 people surrounding the shadow moon disk in a triangular formation, each corresponding to the 3 colored light spots on the disk. The person in charge of the Green Feather Mountain was Tang Wu. This person was about 30 years old and had a heroic figure. Just by standing there, he gave people the feeling that he was as immovable as a mountain, and his vitality was extremely vigorous. The one from the Supreme Luo sect was a coquettish woman called Han Jiyu. She was dressed in an unusually bold and unrestrained manner. She sat upright on an armchair, her 2 long legs propped up on the shadow moon disk. Her slender jade feet were smooth and flawless, and her 10 feet were painted with a dark red color. Snow white and dark red, the clash of colors made people's imaginations run wild. Her dress, which had a slit to the base of her thigh, could not hide her beauty at all. It attracted the attention of the disciples of the 3 families who were walking back and forth, but she acted as if no one was there. Behind her stood a fair-skinned young man who was gently massaging her shoulders. The one from the Qin clan was Qin Wanli, a thin man with a crescent-shaped saber at his waist. He looked at Han Jiyu from time to time, and when their eyes met, Han Jiyu would throw him a coquettish glance, causing Qin Wanli to giggle foolishly. All 3 of them were at the 9th Order Spirit Stream realm. Normally, they would be tempering themselves in the core of the battlefield, but they had returned here to preside over the Dragon Spring meeting. Although there was a contract witnessed by Heaven's Secret, and none of the 3 parties dared to violate it, there were still many loopholes. Therefore, every time the Dragon Spring meeting began, a 9th Order from each party would come back to preside over the overall situation. How could such people be seen in the outer circle? For example, it was not that the Profound Sect and 9-Star Sect did not have 9th Order cultivators, but they usually only had a 7th Order and a 6th Order cultivator overseeing their sect's encampments. Among the 3, Tang Wu's face was cold, and he had an unapproachable posture. Han Jiyu was seductive, and as for Qin Wanli, he looked quite harmless. "Take your dog's paw off, or I don't mind cutting it off." Tang Wu looked up at Han Jiyu and said coldly. Han Jiyu pursed her lips and smiled. "What? You can't afford to play? Are you going to flip the table like 30 years ago?" Seeing that Tang Wu was in a bad mood, she was naturally in a good mood. They were enemies, so there was no need to be polite. However, under Tang Wu's fierce gaze, she still took her foot off and turned to Qin Wanli. "Let's work together to kill this guy." Qin Wanli continued to smirk. "Senior Sister Han, you must be joking. I'm not that capable." "Coward." Han Jiyu curled her lips, looking a little bored. After a short while, someone came up to Tang Wu and whispered a few words. Tang Wu nodded slightly. After that person left, Tang Wu looked at Han Jiyu. "Your Tai Luo sect really hides a lot. You're willing to let such a large number of disciples be raised by other sects. Aren't you afraid that they will be nurtured by others?" The 3 forces were all in the same area, so no one could hide anything from the others. Therefore, Tang Wu had been wondering what had gone wrong. Why had Green Feather Mountain suffered such a great loss in just a few days of the war? It wasn't until now that he received accurate information. Tai Luo sect had accepted a group of talented disciples before, but they didn't place them in their own sect. Instead, they let them cultivate in a friendly force. This time, they suddenly returned to participate in the Dragon Spring meeting, catching Blue Feather Mountain by surprise. Those cultivators were now quite strong, and there was no lack of fifth-order cultivators among them. One had to know that the cultivators participating in the Dragon Spring meeting were limited to second-order and fifth-order cultivators. The reason for this limitation was that first-order cultivators didn't have much combat experience, so they could easily die in such a battle. As for sixth-order cultivators, their cultivation was too high. If they accidentally killed some low-level cultivators, they would lose a lot of merit points. This was something that no cultivator could bear. At the same time, to avoid unnecessary casualties, the cultivators participating in the Dragon Spring meeting were limited in their cultivation. It could be said that the cultivator with the highest cultivation in the entire 100 Peak Mountain was fifth order. Originally, Blue Feather Mountain's fifth-order cultivators had an absolute advantage, but the sudden appearance of a group of people from Tai Luo sect broke the balance. This was the direct reason for Blue Feather Mountain's loss. Chapter 115. This was related to the fact that Green Feather Mountain had occupied the most peaks in the early stages of the Dragon Spring meeting. Occupying more peaks was not necessarily a good thing, so Green Feather Mountain had to disperse their forces to guard these peaks. Now that they had lost 10 peaks in a row, Green Feather Mountain's defenses had become even tighter, making it difficult for Tai Luo sect to make any progress. Moreover, Green Feather Mountain had not lost many people. The cultivators who had been guarding the peaks had not chosen to fight recklessly after sensing the strength of the enemy, preserving a large portion of their strength. The current disadvantage was only temporary and would not determine the final result. After a few days of dealing with the enemy, Green Feather Mountain was clearly ready to counterattack. On the topographic map projected by the Shadow Moon disk, fierce battles had already broken out on several peaks where the blue and black dots intersected. The cultivators on both sides were locked in a fierce battle, and from time to time, dots of light would be annihilated. The blue dots were the cultivators of Green Feather Mountain, the black dots were Tai Luo sect, and the red dots represented the Qin clan. Tang Wu and the other two's gazes were focused on the battlefield. They were judging the situation based on the number of remaining light spots. Gradually, Han Zhiyu's expression became unsightly because it was obvious that the Tai Luo sect was at a disadvantage in this confrontation. Half an hour later, the result came out. Green Feather Mountain had taken back 2 peaks. Han Zhiyu immediately became unhappy and snorted coldly, "A bunch of trash." Tang Wu still stood there, motionless like a mountain, neither happy nor worried. "A rogue cultivator has broken in," Qin Wanli suddenly said. Tang Wu and Han Zhiyu turned their heads to look and saw a white dot of light on the Shadow Moon disk, appearing at the edge. Spirit Stream 4th layer. Han Zhiyu judged the opponent's cultivation from the brightness of the white dot of light and pursed his lips. This guy's luck is really bad. The reason why he said this was because the location where the white speck of light appeared was the territory of the Tai Luo sect. There was a large stretch of mountain peaks there that was occupied by the Tai Luo sect. There were at least 5 or 6 black specks of light guarding each mountain peak. Although a 4th-order Origin Realm cultivator wasn't low in this area, it wasn't high either. Any 5th-order Origin Realm cultivator could easily deal with him. The 100 Peak Mountain covered a large area. It was impossible for the 3 forces to waste their energy to seal off the entire 100 Peak Mountain during the Dragon Spring Conference. Moreover, the nearby rogue cultivators knew that the Dragon Spring Conference was being held. Other than those rogue cultivators gathered by Green Feather Mountain, no one else would rashly barge in. However, there were always exceptions to everything. During the many Dragon Spring conclaves, it was not that there were no rogue cultivators who had mistakenly entered the 100 Peak Mountain. Most of those rogue cultivators did not have a good ending. If they had barged in from Green Feather Mountain, there was still a chance that they would be recruited by Green Feather Mountain. However, if they had barged in from the territory of the Supreme Luo sect or the Qin clan, then he would be sorry. Due to the previous contract, the Green Feather Mountain could recruit these outsiders as helpers. However, the Tai Luo sect and the Qin clan could only rely on their own strength. As a precaution, the Tai Luo sect and the Qin clan would not allow outsiders to become active at the 100 Peak Mountain. Which camp do you think he belongs to? Han Zhiyu looked at the white light with great interest. As a 9th-order cultivator, She had no choice but to come back and preside over the dragon's spring meeting. It was actually a very boring thing. She couldn't kill or beat these little guys, so she could only find some entertainment for herself. Qin Wanli chuckled and said, "Senior apprentice Sister Han says he belongs to whichever camp he belongs to." This was equivalent to not saying anything. "Tang Wu, what about you?" Han Jiyu looked up at Tang Wu. Tang Wu ignored her, causing Han Jiyu to curl her lips. "Blockhead." She turned to look at Qin Wanli. "Do you want to bet?" Qin Wanli said, "It's rare for Senior Sister Han to have such an interest. Junior brother will naturally accompany you." 200 merit points. Han Jiyu immediately became excited. Cough cough. Qin Wanli coughed violently. "A little bet for fun, a little bet for fun." After he finished speaking, he did not give Han Jiyu a chance to speak and directly said, "I bet 20 merit points that this person is from the 10,000 Devil Ridge." Han Jiyu snorted lightly, her interest waning. How boring. She leaned back and raised her hands high, lying on the armchair with her arms and legs spread out. Her posture was very suggestive, and she did not have the demeanor of a ninth-order cultivator at all. 200 merit points. "I bet he is from the Grand Heaven Alliance." Tang Wu, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke. Han Jiyu suddenly stood up and looked at Tang Wu, pursing her lips into a charming smile. "Okay, I'll bet with you." Heaven's secret witness. Heaven's secret witness. In an instant, 3 pairs of eyes focused on the white dot of light. They watched as the dot of light approached the nearest mountain at an extremely fast speed. On the tiger's back, Lu Yi frowned. He did not know if it was an illusion, but he had a feeling that he was being spied on. But when he looked carefully, he found nothing. This made him vigilant, and he even called Yu, who was picking herbs nearby, back. They continued forward without any accidents until they climbed up the nearest mountain, where Hoopa suddenly stopped. Sitting on the tiger's back, Lu Yi pressed his right hand on the hilt of his saber, secretly urging his spirit chi. Hoopa also lowered his body and growled. "There's an ambush here." Lu Yi was clearly aware of this, and he had already stepped into someone's ambush. He did not know who was lying in ambush here, nor did he know why they were lying in ambush here. He did not even know the cultivation of these people. The current situation was very unfavorable for him. A strong wind blew at the top of the mountain, and the leaves rustled. Suddenly, a person's voice rang out not far away. Lightning flash. Lu Yi turned his head towards the direction of the voice and saw a young man sitting on the trunk of a big tree. The young man was looking at him quietly. It was this person who had spoken. Urging his spirit chi, Lu Yi saw the spirit chi on the young man's body. A fourth-order cultivator. He frowned and asked tentatively, "Lei Ming?" With the sound of something breaking through the air, Lu Yi hurriedly lowered his head. 2 sharp arrows came from the left and right, passing through the top of his head, cutting off a few strands of hair. The other party's attack came without any warning. If Lu Yi had not experienced many life and death battles in the past few days, he would not have been able to avoid this attack. He had obviously misunderstood the other party's signal, and the cultivator lying in ambush here was extremely decisive. The moment the signal was wrong, he immediately attacked. Hoopa had already rushed to the left. Lu Yi stepped on the tiger's back and jumped up, blocking an arrow flying towards his face in midair. His eyes locked onto the young man who had spoken before. At the same time the other party launched his attack, he jumped down from the tree trunk, a long sword in his hand, and attacked Lu Yi. Just as Lu Yi landed, the young man was already in front of him. His long sword was like a snake's tongue, aiming straight for Lu Yi's heart. He really wanted to kill at the slightest wrong word. Chapter 116. Facing this sharp sword, Lu Yi did not dodge and instead slashed down at the youth. A fiery red light flashed across the blade and it seemed as if it was on fire. Seeing Lu Yi's ferocity, the youth was obviously taken aback and quickly changed his stance, blocking with his sword. With a loud bang, the moment the sword and blade collided, the youth's sword flew out of his hand and he was forced to retreat again and again. The shock in his eyes deepened, but before he could do anything, Lu Yi's saber slashed down like a storm. Since leaving Blue Cloud Mountain, Lu Yi had been practicing his saber for more than 2 hours a day as long as conditions permitted. This kind of exercise may not allow him to master any profound saber techniques, but it made his foundation more and more solid. Coupled with the experience he had accumulated over the past few days, the current Lu Yi was no longer the young man who had just left Blue Cloud Mountain. He had slowly formed his own fighting style, which was ferociousness and sharpness. This was because he had the defensive spirit inscriptions to rely on. If the young man hadn't changed his move in a hurry to block his first slash, that slash would have cleaved his opponent into two. The youth's cautiousness had allowed him to walk through the gates of hell, but that was all. Banging sounds continued to ring out, and with every saber strike, the youth was forced back 3 steps. Under the powerful impact, the space between his thumb and forefinger began to crack. He howled in his heart. Where did this madman come from? How could he be so aggressive? Even though they were both fourth-order cultivators, the youth's strength was far inferior to this madman's. When the other party attacked with his saber, the vitality around his body was so strong that the youth couldn't help feeling like the guy in front of him was a fierce beast that had just escaped from a cage and was about to devour him. Out of the corner of his eye, the youth caught a glimpse of 2 of his junior brothers approaching from behind. As long as he could hold on for a few more breaths, he would be able to join forces with his 2 junior brothers to attack the other party. While retreating, the youth reached out to his storage bag, but just as he took out a spirit talisman and was about to use it, he heard a crisp cracking sound. The youth was shocked as he caught a glimpse of his sword breaking in the middle from the corner of his eye. The broken blade flew out at an angle and his body went numb as he froze in place. His vision began to tilt, and the last thing he saw was half of a familiar body. Is that my body? The young man's consciousness was destroyed. As blood spurted out, Hupo's tiger roar came from the right, followed by a furious roar of fear. From the left came the sound of something piercing through the air. The enemy hiding in the dark shot another arrow at Lu Yi. However, this arrow had missed its target. The death of the young man must have disturbed the attacker's mind. He wasn't the only one whose mind was in a mess. There were 2 other cultivators who had already rushed behind Lu Yi. Tai Luo Zong Shou had a total of 5 cultivators on this mountain peak, 1 fourth order, 2 third order, and 2 second order. This formation wasn't very strong, but this was the rear of the Tai Luo sect, so they didn't need a strong formation. As long as they didn't lose the mountain in front, the cultivators of the Green Feather Mountain wouldn't be able to attack here. This was the safest position. The reason why he had left some guards here was just in case. This originally foolproof arrangement was broken by the arrival of Lu Yi. The 2 Tai Luo sect cultivators who had already rushed behind Lu Yi felt as if they had been splashed with a bucket of cold water in winter, their bodies turning cold. They could only watch helplessly as their fourth-order senior brother was cut in half by an uninvited guest in just 5 breaths of time, causing their fright and panic to rise to the extreme. This caused them to suddenly stop when they were less than 10 meters away from Lu Yi. Lu Yi turned around, his long saber pointed diagonally at the ground, blood dripping from the blade. His feet stomped on the ground, creating a pit, and in a few steps, he arrived in front of the 2 frightened Tai Luo sect cultivators. At the critical moment of life and death, the 2 of them finally burst out with their potential and charged at Lu Yi. Clang, 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 clang. The 2 third-order cultivators were both pushed back, leaving them wide open. The difference in cultivation meant that even if they worked together, they wouldn't be able to block Lu Yi's saber. The long saber infused with spirit energy drew a fiery red light in front of Lu Yi. This saber didn't even need to use sharpness spirit runes. As screams rang out, the chests of the 2 cultivators were cut open, a faint burnt smell coming from their wounds. One of them fell to the ground, while the other staggered back. Lu Yi took a step forward and stabbed his saber into the heart of the cultivator who had fallen to the ground. Without stopping, he pulled out his saber and slashed at the other cultivator. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of an arrow flying towards him. He raised his saber and slashed it, cutting it away. Just as he was about to finish off the third-order cultivator who was still alive, the latter had already fallen to the ground. Lu Yi's saber had already cut through his heart. An extremely mournful scream rang out from the side. Lu Yi turned his head and saw Hupa biting the neck of a female cultivator, blood gushing out of his mouth. The female cultivator was still holding a bow in her hand. She struggled under Hu Po's body, but couldn't move him at all. This female cultivator was only a second-order cultivator. She was one of the ones hiding in a tree and shooting arrows at Lu Yi. When Hu Po and Lu Yi separated, she rushed over. If it was just Hu Po alone, he might not be able to do anything to her. After all, she was hiding in a tree, but it was different with Yi. Yi directly appeared behind this female cultivator and pushed her down with force. During the time he was with Lu Yi, Hu Po ate and drank good food every day. He didn't know how many spirit accumulation pills he had consumed. Now, his strength had greatly improved compared to before. With Yi's cooperation, they easily took down this second-order cultivator. Lu Yi didn't care about this female cultivator and looked to the side. There were two people who had shot arrows at him just now. One of them was bitten by Hu Po, and the other one was still there. But when Lu Yi looked over, he found that this guy had already run a few dozen meters away. Lu Yi raised his saber and was about to give chase when he suddenly remembered something. He raised his hand and pointed it at the man's back. Fiery red spirit energy began to gather in his palm. The pure spirit energy formed a fat fire quail. The fire quail flapped its wings and flew forward like an arrow from a bow. In the blink of an eye, the fire quail brushed past the fleeing cultivator and crashed into a big tree, setting it ablaze. He didn't hit. Lu Yi raised his brow and gathered spirit energy in his palm again. This time, he slightly adjusted the direction of his spirit energy. The second fire quail flew out and hit the man's back. With a bang, the man fell to the ground as if he had been struck by lightning. His back was charred and he only twitched a few times before he stopped breathing. This was a technique from the Red Lotus soaring to the heavens secret art. Its power was quite good. A dot of red light flew out and landed on the back of Lu Yi's hand. Lu Yi looked around and frowned. What is this? This battle was inexplicable. He had only misunderstood the other party's secret signal, and the other party had attacked him mercilessly without even asking which side he belonged to. Since the other party didn't hold back, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't hold back. It wasn't until he killed all of them that he confirmed that these guys belonged to the Myriad Devil Ridge camp. It seemed that he had killed the right person. Chapter 117. Inside the hall, 3 pairs of eyes watched as the white dot and the 5 black dots collided. In less than 20 breaths, the 5 black dots were annihilated one after another, leaving behind only the white that was still flickering. The 3 people's eyelids twitched. Han Jiewei hurriedly raised his hand and pressed on his battlefield imprint, hurriedly sending out a message. Soon, nearly 10 black dots separated from the few mountains near the white dots and gathered there. This woman was obviously furious. Who knew where this fourth-order cultivator came from? He ran to the back of Tai Luo sect and destroyed a peak. This was simply a slap in the face. Although she didn't know how that person did it, he was able to kill 5 people in such a short time while fighting 1 against 5. It was obvious that this person's methods were extraordinary. However, that peak was still occupied by Tai Luo sect, so it was easy to mobilize people to encircle him. The other party was most likely injured. As long as he dared to stay there for a moment, he would definitely die. Tang Wu looked at her and didn't interfere. This matter couldn't be interfered with. Everyone had their battlefield imprints, so it was very convenient for them to send messages. Moreover, there were people coming and going in this hall, so any news would be constantly spread. The 3 ninth-order cultivators were here not only to ensure the smooth running of the Dragon Spring meeting, but also to interfere and command the Dragon Spring meeting to a certain extent. However, it was still a pity that this 4th-order cultivator had entered the 100-peak mountain from the wrong place. If he had entered from Blue Feather Mountain's territory, he might have been able to help them, but he chose to enter from Tai Luo sect's territory, so he probably wouldn't have a good end. The only way to survive was to retreat immediately. During the Dragon Spring meeting, Tai Luo sect wouldn't have too much energy to chase after him. Just as Tang Wu was thinking this, the white dot began to move again. Seeing the direction the white dot was moving in, Tang Wu knew that this person was dead for sure. Han Jiyu gritted his teeth and sneered, "Good, you've got guts." After the white dot killed the 5 Tai Luo sect cultivators, not only did it not choose to retreat, it even rushed into the 100-peak mountain. Qin Wanli laughed from the side. Where did this hothead come from? Doesn't he know that the three of us are holding a Dragon Spring meeting here? Tang Wu stretched out his hand to Han Jiyu and looked at her silently. His meaning was obvious. What? Did I lose? Who knows which camp this guy is from? He only killed a few of my Tai Luo sect's disciples. Who can prove that he is from the Haoyan Alliance? Han Jiyu was in a bad mood at the moment. These words were not without reason. On the Spirit Stream battlefield, even people from the same faction could attack each other. Furthermore, killing others would also give merit points. Tang Wu withdrew his hand and did not continue to pester him. He had the same idea just now. In the end, the previous bet was just a spur of the moment. Everyone knew that it was very difficult to get the other party to fulfill the bet, unless there was a way to prove that the white belonged to the camp. On the mountain peak, Lu Yi packed up his spoils of war and rode on his tiger once more. To him, the previous battle was just a small interlude on his journey and would not affect him much. However, to be on the safe side, he still let Yi run ahead to scout ahead. Yi came and went like a ghost, so she was most suitable for this task. Sitting on the tiger's back, Lu Yi threw a spirit accumulation pill into his mouth to recover. The battle just now started in a hurry and ended quickly, so he did not consume too much spirit qi. If he had not used two spirit techniques at the last moment, he would have consumed less spirit qi. As for Han Jiyu's assumption that he must have been injured, it was impossible. However, it was undoubtedly a good habit to keep one's spirit qi full when traveling alone. Speaking of which, the power of the Fire Phoenix technique was indeed quite good. A second-order Origin Realm Master who was hit by it was immediately killed. The only downside was that there was a certain sense of shame when using this technique, so one needed to have a strong heart. It seemed that he had to find time to study it and see if he could change the external appearance of the technique to a normal one. After a cup of tea's time, Yi returned and told Lu Yi a piece of bad news. There were a few more cultivators on the mountain peak in front of them, and they were heading straight for them. It seemed that these people were in the same group as the ones he killed before. Lu Yi was sure that the 5 cultivators who were killed did not send any message before they died because the battle ended too quickly for them to react. But even so, the other party's companions were heading towards them. What was going on? After thinking for a moment, Lu Yi decided to retreat. He didn't know the cultivation of the cultivators who were heading towards him. He only saw a few people and didn't dare to get too close, so there was no way to determine their cultivation. If the other party's cultivation was not high, Lu Yi was confident that he could deal with them, but if there were a few 5th-order cultivators or 1 or 2 6th-order cultivators among them, it would be troublesome. Of course, the possibility of this was not high. After all, this was only the periphery of the battlefield. Lu Yi just felt that the situation was not right. He had encountered some cultivators along the way, but it was the first time he had encountered them so frequently. He simply suspected that he had broken into the territory of some great force. However, the mark on the map indicated that this was the intersection of 3 forces and did not belong to any one of them. He went forward to explore again, and soon, more bad news came. There were more than a dozen people behind him, and they were coming to outflank him. Lu Yi had a bad feeling. Now he was sure that he had really broken into the territory of some great force. Otherwise, it would not have caused such a big reaction. It was too late to retreat now. Lu Yi could vaguely feel the fluctuations of spirit energy from those people, which meant that they were very close to each other. He patted Hu Po's body, changed direction, and swept out from the side. There were people in front and behind, but there couldn't be people from the side, right? In the main hall, Han Jiyu glared hatefully at the white dot jumping up and down in the 100 Peaks mountain. She passed down orders, and wave after wave of black dots set off from each mountain peak to outflank the white. She had now received accurate information that the cultivator who had broken into this place was riding a big white tiger, so he was very fast. The Tai Luo sect cultivators chasing him could not catch up at all. However, she did not need her disciples to catch up with the enemy. Under her constant command, a tight encirclement slowly took shape. The white dots were everywhere, and there were no less than 30 black dots. No matter which side he broke through from, he would be attacked. As long as they delayed him for a moment, The others could swarm him and chop him into meat paste. Han Jiyu was furious that such a thing had happened during the Dragon Spring Conference. If it were not for the fact that she could not fight during the Dragon Spring Conference, she would have personally captured the guy riding the white tiger and let him taste all the torture in the world. On the tiger's back, Lu Ye's expression was extremely serious. After 2 hours of running, he found that not only did he not get rid of those unknown enemies, but the situation was getting worse. He did not go out to explore anymore, because there were enemies everywhere. He did not understand how the enemy had completed this encirclement. He had been riding Hoopa for half a day, charging left and right, and there was no pattern to the route they took. Even so, he was still surrounded. If he could not hide, then he could only kill his way out. Lu Yi patted the tiger's back gently with one hand and pressed the hilt of his saber with the other. Hoopa seemed to know his thoughts, and with a roar, its speed suddenly increased, breaking through the encirclement. Chapter 118. After crossing a mountain pass, several figures appeared in front of him, the one leading them emitting a dense spirit chi. Impressively, he was a fifth-order cultivator. This person leapt from tree to tree, his figure moving like the wind as he rushed towards Lu Yi from 10 meters away. The long spear in his hand was like a dragon as he shouted, "Die!" Spirit chi surged from the long spear as it whistled through the air, increasing the power of the spear. The distance between the two sides quickly closed, and by the time Hoopa wanted to dodge, it was already too late. Lu Yi raised his hand towards the man, spirit chi surging from his palm. In the next moment, a red light flashed as a fat bird flapped its wings and slammed into the man. A magic cultivator? The newcomer was taken aback. For a fourth-order cultivator to be able to cast spells so quickly, there was no doubt he was a Dharma cultivator. This magic technique was a bit similar to the Firebird technique, but the difference was that the Firebird Yang Kai used was a bit fatter. Since it was difficult to dodge in midair, the man thrust his spear towards the fat bird flying towards him. With a bang, spirit chi exploded and a scorching hot aura enveloped him. Fortunately, he was a fifth-order cultivator, so he hurriedly pushed his spirit chi to protect himself. When he landed, his expression was dignified. With just a moment of contact, he could feel the purity of the other party's spirit chi. It was not something a fourth-order cultivator could possess. Turning his head, he saw the young man riding the white tiger charging towards him from the flank. The young man had no intention of confronting him head-on. 2 fourth-order cultivators had joined forces to surround him, one of them wielding a machete that looked extremely heavy. He aimed it at Big Tiger's head and swung it down. The other man wielded a long sword and stabbed it towards Lu Yi, who was riding on the tiger's back. The scorching hot aura rose again as red spirit chi condensed and another fat firebird flew out, attacking the saber-wielding fourth-order cultivator. At the same time, Lu Yi pulled out his saber and slashed towards the sword-wielding enemy. With a clanging sound, the fourth-order swordmaster was forced back. Although their cultivations were the same, he was unable to resist Lu Ye's leaping tiger saber. On the other side, the fat firebird was cut apart by the saber-wielding fourth-order origin realm cultivator. Although the saber-wielding fourth-order origin realm cultivator hadn't been injured, it had saved Hoopa from the same fate. Taking advantage of the moment the origin realm cultivator was stunned by the explosion of the firebird, Hoopa swept out with his claw, causing the man to let out a muffled groan as the sound of bones breaking rang out from his chest and he fell to the ground. In the blink of an eye, the pincer attack of the 2 fourth-order masters was broken, leaving behind a few third-order masters who stared dumbfounded at Da Hu and the young man who were rushing towards them. "Dodge!" The fifth-order cultivator hurriedly shouted. In the original plan, he and the 2 fourth-order masters would be responsible for the first round of attacks, ensuring that the intruder would be knocked off the tiger's back. As long as he was knocked off the tiger's back, he would die. But he never expected that this fourth-order origin realm cultivator would actually be a Dharma cultivator. His Firebird technique was extremely fast, causing his overbearing spear attack to fail. He, as a fifth-order origin realm cultivator, wasn't able to obstruct the intruder, and the 2 fourth-order masters weren't able to either. How could the remaining third-order masters block this intruder? The majestic tiger swept past the Third Order masters, leaving them in the dust. The Fifth Order cultivator chased after it for a few steps, but seeing the distance between them getting wider and wider, he could only bitterly stop. Turning his head to look, he saw a Third Order junior brother clutching his throat. Blood had already dyed his upper body red, and his mouth was filled with blood. Reaching out to grab him, he shouted with difficulty, "Senior brother, save me." How could he save him? With such injuries, he could only wait for death. By the time the Tai Luo sect cultivators arrived, they only saw these people standing in place with ugly expressions. One of their fellow disciples had already died on the spot. Break out, break out, break out. Lu Ye's expression was dignified. He felt that he was surrounded by enemies from all directions. No matter which direction he went, he couldn't escape from their encirclement. He really couldn't figure out who he had provoked. Whose territory was this? Had he fallen into a den of thieves? Fortunately, he had Hu Pe. If it weren't for Hu Pe's extreme speed, he would have had the capital to break out of the encirclement. However, he could feel that the further he went, the stronger the encirclement became. At first, it was rare for him to meet a Fifth Order master, but now, every time he met a cultivator, there would be 1 or 2 Fifth Order masters, making him extremely uncomfortable. Not only was he uncomfortable, Han Jiyu, who was looking at the moon shadow plate in the hall, was also uncomfortable. She watched as the white dot rushed left and right in 100 Peak Mountain, constantly getting surrounded and breaking out of the encirclement. From time to time, 1 or 2 black dots would suddenly disappear. In less than a day, more than a dozen Tai Luo sect cultivators had died at the hands of this guy. Han Jiyu gritted her teeth. She couldn't wait to dig the white dot out of the moon shadow plate and bite it to death. The Dragon Spring meet was going well, but suddenly, such a troublemaker appeared and caused Tai Luo sect to suffer losses again and again. As the person in charge of the Dragon Spring meet, Han Jiyu naturally had to bear some responsibility. If that was all, it would be fine. At most, a dozen or so disciples would die, and Tai Luo sect could bear such a loss. Which Dragon Spring meet didn't have casualties? But the current situation was that Tai Luo sect had invested a lot of energy and manpower to encircle this person, causing them to suffer losses in the confrontation with Blue Feather Mountain. Tang Wu wasn't just going to watch a show. Seeing that Tai Luo sect was being restrained by an outsider, he naturally took action. The mountains they had seized before were now lost one after another. However, Tai Luo sect couldn't just leave the outsider alone. More than a dozen disciples had already died at his hands. If they left him alone, they wouldn't be able to explain themselves. Moreover, the outsider was now in Tai Luo sect's territory. If they ignored him, their losses would only be greater. Therefore, Tai Luo sect was now facing a very awkward situation. They wanted to quickly kill the outsider and then put all their energy into the confrontation with Blue Feather Mountain, but they couldn't kill him. They were in a dilemma. In comparison, Tang Wu was undoubtedly feeling good. Originally, Tai Luo sect was at a disadvantage, but the arrival of an uninvited guest allowed them to slowly turn the situation around. However, looking at the white dots scurrying around 100 Peak Mountain, he felt a little uncomfortable. It was good that this guy was walking in a straight line. This way, he could kill his way through Tai Luo sect's territory and enter Blue Feather Mountain's territory. As long as he entered Blue Feather Mountain's territory, both sides could meet. Based on this guy's previous performance, if he could be recruited, he would be a great help to Blue Feather Mountain. He could only secretly pray that this uninvited guest could hold on for a little longer. Only by continuing to live could he continue to restrain Tai Luo sect's energy. Just as he was thinking this, Tang Wu suddenly raised his eyebrows. This was because the white dot in the moon shadow disk had changed direction again. This time, it was heading straight for Blue Feather Mountain's territory. Tang Wu immediately sent out a message. This bastard is finally enlightened. This was an opportunity. Blue Feather Mountain could try to get in touch with this guy. On the other side, Han Jiyu clearly saw Tang Wu's action. Immediately, his eyes were as sharp as knives. He fiercely glared at Tang Wu. Activating the battlefield mark, he also sent out a message. No matter what, they couldn't let that outsider enter Blue Feather Mountain's territory. Chapter 119. In the wilderness, Lu Yi was fleeing miserably on Hupo's back. Several talismans had exploded behind him. As his spirit power surged, the spells sealed within the talismans were unleashed, leaving him in an extremely sorry state. After fighting for an entire day, the cultivators surrounding him had learned their lesson and greeted him with talismans when they met. Although talismans were expensive, low-level cultivators could still afford them if they clenched their teeth. Generally speaking, everyone would have one or two as a life-saving trump card. Now that they were attacking without regard for their losses, Lu Yi found it troublesome. If it weren't for the fact that he frequently used defensive spirit tattoos to defend himself, he and Hupo would have been powerless to resist. Even so, the man and the tiger were both injured. It wasn't just talismans. The cultivators from the unknown faction had also sent out demonic beasts to hunt them down. There weren't many cultivators with pet beasts because demonic beasts were difficult to tame. If they weren't handled well, they could even turn on their masters. At this moment, Lu Yi was fleeing at the front. Behind him were 5 or 6 cultivators riding on different pet beasts. Although these pet beasts weren't as fast as Hu Shenjun and weren't as fast, the constant obstructions in front of Lu Yi severely interfered with his ability to break out of the encirclement. If he delayed even a little, they would catch up to him. There were several times when Lu Yi was almost completely trapped. With great difficulty, he was able to carve out an opening and continue fleeing. After a while, Lu Yi discovered a problem. He couldn't go around in circles. The more he went around, the more enemies there would be. On the other hand, if he went in a straight line, he would encounter fewer enemies. He didn't know that the Tai Luo sect cultivators had Han Zhiyu guiding them from behind. With the moon shadow disk, none of his movements could escape Han Zhiyu's eyes. The sound of air breaking rang out again. Several arrows shot toward Lu Yi from different directions. Although Lu Yi was startled, he didn't panic. He circulated his spirit power to protect his body and slashed forward with his blade. An arrow flying toward Hupo was cut in half. At the same time, Hupo quickly moved in a zigzag pattern to avoid the other arrows. This wasn't Lu Yi commanding Hupo. It was the experience he had gained from his own bloody experience. The Tai Luo sect cultivators knew that if they wanted to encircle Lu Yi, they would have to cripple Hupo first. Otherwise, with such a demonic beast around, it would be very difficult to keep Lu Yi here. Therefore, after the first few encounters, the archers who were hiding in the dark had set their sights on Amber and wanted to get rid of it first. Because of this, Hupo was hit by a few arrows. Fortunately, it wasn't a serious injury. Lu Yi broke the arrows, leaving only half of them stuck in Hupo's body. Ever since then, Hupo had become smarter. When he heard the sound of something breaking through the air, he immediately began to move like a snake, avoiding many attacks. Just as he dodged the arrows, a few figures appeared in front of him. Under the night sky, the spiritual light on their bodies was extremely conspicuous. 3 fifth-order masters. Lu Yi lowered his eyes, realizing that the situation was not good. If there was only 1 fifth order, he could still deal with it, but if there were 2, he wouldn't be able to deal with them at all, but now there were 3 fifth-order masters. Once he was trapped, he would undoubtedly die. He didn't know which great force this territory belonged to, but it had such a strong foundation. Along the way, he had encountered more than a dozen fifth-order masters. One had to know that when he participated in the battle between Profound Sect and 9-Star Sect, he didn't even see the shadow of a fifth-order master. However, he didn't know that the declaration of war between Profound Sect and 9-Star Sect was made in a hurry. Most of the fifth-order masters of these 2 great forces were out adventuring and couldn't rush back in time, so there were very few of them. Moreover, they were suppressing each other, so he naturally couldn't meet them. However, the Dragon Spring meeting was different. It was held once every 3 years, and the 3 great forces nearby attached great importance to it. 10 days ago, all the cultivators above 2nd Order and below 5th Order had gathered in the station, waiting for the Dragon Spring meeting to begin. The number of 5th Order masters in a sect wasn't small, and the dozen 5th Order masters Lu Yi encountered were only a small part of them. Most of them were guarding the mountain peaks. Although Han Zhiyu couldn't wait to cut Lu Yi into 1,000 pieces, she also knew that there were priorities. She couldn't mobilize all the masters for a fourth order of unknown origin. If she really did that, Green Feather Mountain would definitely take advantage of the situation to invade. At that time, it wouldn't be as simple as losing a dozen people, they would probably lose many mountains. Of the 3 fifth-order masters who jumped out, 2 rushed towards Lu Yi. One of them stood not far away and raised his hand to point in Lu Ye's direction, spirit energy surging from his fingertips. It's a Dharma cultivator. Lu Yi felt a headache coming on. The people hiding in the dark shooting arrows weren't very strong, and their cultivations were generally not high. Lu Yi and Hu Pa now had experience dealing with them, so they couldn't hurt them. However, a fifth-order Dharma cultivator was different. The power of the Dharma techniques used by such a cultivator couldn't be underestimated. If they were careless, they wouldn't have a good ending. So, seeing that the guy was about to cast a Dharma technique, Lu Yi made a prompt decision. He raised his hand and threw out an object, forming a seal with one hand. The object that was thrown out instantly arrived above the Dharma cultivator's head and rapidly grew in size, turning into a large bell overflowing with spirit energy, and slammed down. The Dharma cultivator obviously didn't expect Lu Yi to have this trick up his sleeve. He wanted to dodge in a hurry, but it was too late, and he was directly covered. The other 2 fifth-order masters had already rushed forward. The one in the lead had a tall and sturdy body, and his vitality was abundant. At a glance, it was obvious that he wanted to walk the path of body cultivation. Faced with Hu Po's attack, he didn't dodge at all. Instead, he went up to Hu Po in a provocative manner. He raised both his hands to block Hu Po's 2 front legs, and from the looks of it, he wanted to throw Hu Po to the ground. Asterisk roar. Asterisk a tiger's roar echoed through the forest. The body cultivator and Hu Po were in a deadlock for only 2 breaths before he was pushed to the ground. He had overestimated his own ability. In terms of strength, Hu Po was inferior to him, but monster beasts had their own advantages, especially a monster beast like Hu Po. If one didn't have enough strength, they wouldn't be able to block his charge. Taking advantage of the 2 breaths he was delayed, the other fifth-order master had already charged out from behind him. This guy should be a weapon cultivator because he held a large hammer in his hand. The head of the hammer was as big as his head, and he didn't look like someone to be trifled with. The hammer that seemed to weigh 1,000 kilograms was as light as a feather in his hand. He jumped up from behind his fellow sect member and smashed the hammer towards Lu Yi. The hammer glowed with a dazzling light as he shouted, "Get down here!" This blow was powerful and heavy, and it felt like a single person could defeat 10 people with brute strength. Lu Yi couldn't block such a blow no matter what. If he tried to block it head-on, he would only end up with broken bones. So, he hurriedly activated his defensive spirit rune and turned it into a shield in front of him. Asterisk Hong. Asterisk with a loud bang, Lu Yi felt the spirit energy in his body flowing out like a flood from a broken dam. As for the defensive spirit rune, it was actually unable to withstand this aggressive attack. Tiny cracks appeared on it, and in just 3 breaths, it shattered with a loud bang. This was the first time Lu Yi had encountered someone who could shatter his defensive spirit rune with a single blow. One had to know that even the 7th-order Dong Shu Yi hadn't been able to do so. It seemed that the defensive spirit rune had some advantages when it came to blocking spirit techniques, but its defensive power was inferior when it came to blocking pure attacks. Although his defensive spirit rune had been broken, it had still blocked most of the impact. As the sledgehammer fell, Hu Po's body bent and his front legs fell to the ground. Lu Yi, on the other hand, was smashed backwards by the sledgehammer. If he hadn't hurriedly raised his long sword in front of him, his chest would have been flattened. Just as Lu Yi was about to fall off Hu Po's back, a small hand suddenly reached out and grabbed his belt, pulling him back. It was Yi, who had been hiding inside Hu Po's body. The help she could provide in this battle was very limited, so she hadn't shown up until now. At this moment, she suddenly appeared and saved Lu Yi. His mouth was full of the taste of rust, and his chest and arms were sore. He was obviously injured. It wasn't easy to block such a blow. At this moment, Lu Yi was very glad that he had trapped the 5th-order Dharma cultivator with his small bell spirit artifact. Otherwise, with the cooperation of these 3, he might really have died here. The body cultivator got up from the ground and retreated a few meters, looking at Lu Yi vigilantly. The weapon cultivator also retreated a few meters, holding his hammer with both hands with a dignified expression. If one looked carefully, they would see that his hands were trembling violently. That hammer strike just now was the result of him using his full strength. It also put a great burden on his body. In this short moment of delay, there was a rustling sound in the surrounding jungle. The cultivators were coming from all directions, and the cultivators riding monster beasts were also rapidly approaching. Lu Yi didn't have time to check his injuries. He quickly identified the weak points of their defense and immediately found a direction. Just as he was about to let Hoopa head in that direction, he suddenly heard a long howl from afar. That howl was continuous, and along with it, there was also a strong fluctuation of spirit energy coming from that direction. Lu Yi turned his head and saw that on the mountain closest to him, colorful spirit lights were constantly flashing. Someone was fighting over there, and it was extremely lively. Lu Yi patted Hoopa's back and pointed his long saber in that direction. Rush over there. He didn't choose the weak point of the enemy's defense, but chose the direction of the fifth-order Dharma cultivator with the big hammer. No matter who was fighting over there, one of them was definitely one of the cultivators chasing him. It turned out that they had enemies. Lu Yi suddenly felt that that direction was a good place to go. Moreover, all the previous encounters made him understand one thing. Escaping like this wasn't a solution. The other party seemed to have the ability to track his whereabouts, and there was an extremely clever person commanding them, so it was easy for them to encircle him again and again. Seeing Lu Yi rush in that direction, the fifth-order body cultivator hurriedly shouted, "Don't let him escape." The weapon cultivator with the sledgehammer puffed out his chest and stood in front of Hoopa. The veins on his arms bulged as he raised the sledgehammer up high. The veins on his arms burst open and blood instantly dyed his clothes red. "Come and die," he shouted as he rushed towards Lu Yi. Red spirit energy surged as Lu Yi raised his hand and shot a spirit technique at the weapon cultivator. Chapter 120. The corner of the weapon cultivator's eyes twitched violently as he cursed in his heart. He had forgotten that Lu Yi could use spirit techniques, but he still didn't dodge. Instead, he pushed his spirit chi to the limit and swung his hammer to meet the incoming spirit technique. Hong. The weapon cultivator's body flew out. His chest was badly mutilated, and there was a burnt smell. Lu Yi had already jumped over him on Hoopa. Not only that, he bent down and slashed with his saber. The moment the sharpness spirit inscriptions appeared on his saber, it flashed with light. The sound of a sharp weapon cutting into flesh rang out, and blood gushed out. Lu Yi didn't even have time to check the result of his battle before he was taken away by Hoopa. "Chase after them!" someone shouted from behind. Arrows tore through the air one after another, shooting into the night sky. Feeling the anxious reaction of this group, Lu Yi immediately understood that he had made the right choice. If he had really rushed towards the weak point just now, he would have been able to escape the danger for a while, but he would still be pursued. Thinking about it this way, it seemed that the weak point in the defense was deliberately left behind by the enemy. He took back the small bell spirit artifact. The moment the trapped fifth-order cultivator regained his freedom, he cast a spirit technique in the direction Lu Yi had fled. However, Lu Yi had already disappeared. The cultivators riding demonic beasts continued to chase after Lu Yi, but after running for a while, they all stopped in place as if they had received some kind of order. They glared hatefully in the direction Lu Yi had left, their eyes full of unwillingness. At this moment, looking at the shadow moon disk, in front of Lu Yi, there were more than 20 blue light spots rushing towards him. On the nearby mountain top, there was another group of blue light spots fighting with the black light spots. The commotion that Lu Yi had sensed earlier was coming from that direction. In the hall, Han Jiu glared at Tang Wu. If looks could kill, Tang Wu would have died 100 times over by now. The 20 or so blue dots approaching the white spot were obviously mobilized by Tang Wu. If not, Tai Luo's sect wouldn't have given up on the chase. If they had continued, they would have broken into Blue Feather Mountains territory. The nearby battle was also ordered by Tang Wu. Blue Feather Mountain didn't want to take over the mountain top. They just wanted to create some movement to inform the outsider. Now, it seemed that the outsider was a very smart guy. Although he didn't communicate with Tang Wu, under Tang Wu's secret arrangements, the outsider took the initiative to move closer to Blue Feather Mountain. The weak point of the defense she designed didn't play a role in baiting the enemy. Han Jiayue was completely defeated in this round of remote confrontation. More than a dozen cultivators on his side died and several mountains were lost. The outsider was even rescued by the Green Feather Mountain. So ferocious? Qin Wanli, who was standing at the side, exclaimed in surprise. Yang Kai had been watching the show for the entire afternoon and night. He had seen with his own eyes how the white light moved left and right in 100 Peak Mountain. To be honest, Yang Kai couldn't help admiring it. If he had been in Yang Kai's shoes, he definitely wouldn't have been able to do such a thing when he was just a fourth-order cultivator. If he didn't have any skill, Yang Kai would have died the first time he was surrounded. It would be fine if that was all, but the key point was that the black dot on the shadow moon disk that symbolized a fifth-order cultivator suddenly disappeared. In other words, a fifth-order cultivator died at the hands of the outsider. This was a little scary. He only escaped the pursuit of a fifth-order cultivator. It could be said that he relied on the power of his mount, but killing someone above his realm meant something else. This guy, is he from some great force? Qin Wanli muttered in his heart. You still want to watch the show? Han Jiyu suddenly turned to look at him, her eyes spitting fire. Qin Wanli coughed lightly and quickly corrected his attitude. We will attack wherever senior sister Han tells us to. Although the Qin clan had entered the graded realm and had their own base on the battlefield, they had only risen recently. They still relied on Tai Luo sect a lot, so they didn't dare to offend the other party. Especially when this woman was angry, Qin Wanli had to be more careful. Seeing his attitude, Han Jiyu calmed down a little. She didn't avoid Tang Wu and began to discuss the attack plan in front of him. Tang Wu was also deploying countermeasures. Occasionally, he glanced at the shadow moon disk and found that the white dot had already connected with the people he arranged. He was relieved. At this time, Lu Yi looked at the 20 or so cultivators in front of him and held a jade slip in his hand silently. These people didn't have any hostility and seemed to know that he was here. Before they approached, they revealed their identities and showed that they were from Grand Heaven Alliance. Since the other party took the initiative, Lu Yi naturally showed the blue light of the battlefield mark on the back of his hand to avoid any unpleasant misunderstandings. The jade slip in his hand was given to him by the fifth-order cultivator named Xie Jin. He only needed to check it to understand the whole story and his situation. Although the other party was a fifth-order cultivator, his words were quite polite. The pursuers behind him didn't catch up for the time being. Lu Yi patted Hu Po's back gently to let him be more vigilant. Then he picked up the jade slip and put it on his forehead to check it. After a short while, he put down the jade slip with a strange expression. Dragon Spring Guild? A battle for the spots to enter the Dragon Spring organized by 3 great forces? Lu Yi was a little speechless. He had been walking in uninhabited places these days, trying to avoid the territories occupied by sects and forces. Even if he needed something, he would go to the market where loose cultivators gathered to buy daily necessities. The last time he went to the loose cultivator market was 10 days ago. He didn't have any contact with people, so he didn't know that this was the place where the Dragon Spring Guild was held. He chose to pass through 100 Peak Mountain because it was the junction of the 3 great forces nearby and didn't belong to any of them. He thought it would be safer and more convenient to pass through here. Who knew that it would cause such a commotion? Last time, he chose the Heaven-Splitting Gorge because it was the junction of Profound Sect and 9 Stars Sect. In the end, the 2 forces fought and 9 Stars Sect's encampment was captured. He realized that he seemed to have made a mistake. He shouldn't have chosen the junction of the 3 great forces because this place was generally very chaotic. If he really wanted to avoid trouble, he had to choose the sphere of influence of Grand Heaven Alliance. He secretly remembered this lesson. According to the information revealed in the Jade Slip, the place where he entered 100 Peak Mountain was the rear of Tai Luo sect. That was why he was chased by Tai Luo sect cultivators. This was in line with his previous encounters. Among the cultivators he met at the beginning, There were very few fifth-order cultivators, but as he continued to move forward, the number of fifth-order cultivators increased. Because the rear was safer than the front, the requirements for the number of people stationed at the rear weren't high. On the contrary, the mountain peaks bordering Blue Feather Mountain's territory required more cultivators with higher cultivation, so there were more people. The reason why the other party came to his rescue was because of the Shadow Moon Plate. The three sects had ninth-order cultivators stationed there to monitor the movements of all the cultivators in 100 Peak Mountain. So, no matter how Lu Yi fled or hid, he couldn't escape the detection of those ninth-order cultivators. No wonder he felt a pair of eyes staring at him. No matter how he escaped, he would be surrounded. It turned out that it was because of the Shadow Moon Plate. The situation was in line with his experience, so Lu Yi could basically judge that the other party wasn't lying. And in any case, the other party's 20-some people came to his rescue and helped him escape the fate of being chased. It could be said that he owed them a favor. "Junior brother, it's not good to stay here for long. Please move." Xie Jin gestured with his hand. Lu Yi nodded, "Okay." The group gathered around Lu Yi and moved forward at an extremely fast speed. Along the way, Xie Jin and Lu Yi chatted. When asked for his name, Lu Yi told him that he was Yi. Fortunately, this guy was tactful and didn't inquire about Lu Ye's origin. Walking around the Spirit Stream battlefield, many people would hide their sect, especially those from great forces who came to the outer circle to gain experience. Don't think that cultivators from great forces would be treated with respect. In fact, they were mostly targeted by hostile forces. Tang Wu sent a message to Xie Jin, informing him that Lu Yi was most likely a disciple of a great sect. Xie Jin naturally wouldn't refuse. Along the way, the 20-some people dispersed one after another. In the end, only Xie Jin and Lu Yi were left. Those people were all mobilized from the nearby mountains. Now that their mission was completed, they naturally had to go back to guard. Moreover, Han Zhaoyue seemed to have gone crazy. He joined forces with Qin Wanli to attack the peak of Green Feather Mountain, causing the pressure on Green Feather Mountain's side to sharply increase. The mountain that they had swallowed during the day was spat out again. It was very helpless. Fortunately, there weren't many casualties. After crossing two mountains, they arrived at a valley. It was brightly lit, and there were tents erected. Cultivators went in and out of the tents from time to time. Lu Yi rode on the tiger's back and looked around. He found that many of the cultivators here were injured. Waves of screams came from many of the tents, and the smell of blood filled the air. He immediately understood that this place was probably a place similar to a field hospital. The cultivators who were injured in the battle ahead would come back here to receive treatment. When Lu Yi arrived, many cultivators turned to look at him. Someone shouted, "Brother, well done." Some people cheered and whistled at him. Some hot female cultivators even threw flirtatious glances at him. Lu Yi was a little confused by the enthusiasm of the large group of injured people. Xie Jin smiled and said, "Junior brother's previous feat has spread. Everyone admires you very much." Lu Yi finally understood what was going on. He followed Xie Jin all the way forward until they reached a tent. Xie Jin said, "Junior brother Yi, stay here for the time being. Someone will come to treat your injuries later." "Thank you." He couldn't refuse the kindness of others. His injuries weren't too serious. After experiencing two near-death experiences, Lu Ye's tolerance for pain was very strong. However, Hu Po's injuries were quite severe. The main reason was that the group of Tai Luo sect cultivators had thrown too many talismans at Hu Po. Later on, they had also specifically shot arrows at Hu Po. Although Lu Yi had helped Hu Po block many of them, there were still some gaps. "Then I won't disturb your rest, junior brother." Xie Jin was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something. He turned around and said, "Right, I almost forgot." As he spoke, he took out a storage bag. Chapter 121. Xie Jin tossed the storage bag to Lu Yi. Lu Yi caught it with a puzzled look. "This is," Xie Jin explained with a smile, "this is the reward from my Blue Feather Mountain to junior brother. 1 merit point is 2 spirit stones, and an additional 10 spirit stones for killing a 5th order enemy. Junior brother has killed 1 5th order, 3 fourth order, 5 third order, and 6 second order. With Junior Brother's fourth order cultivation, your merit points should be 49. Junior Brother can count them. As soon as he opened his mouth, not only did he list out how many people Lu Yi had killed along the way, he even calculated his cultivation base and how many merit points he had obtained. If he didn't know about the existence of the Shadow Moon Plate, Lu Yi would have suspected that Xie Jin had plucked out his eyes and placed them on him. Before coming, Senior Brother Tang Wu repeatedly told me that these spirit stones must be handed over to Junior Brother. Junior Brother, please do not refuse. Junior Brother, please have a good rest. Xie Jin finished speaking very quickly and didn't give Lu Yi a chance to speak again, opening the tent flap and leaving. Lu Yi was left holding the storage bag and looking at Hupo. A moment later, Lu Yi checked the battlefield mark on the back of his hand and found that he had indeed gained 49 merit points, bringing his total to 223. Did the last fifth order weapon cultivator die? Thinking about it, when Lu Yi rode past him on Hupo's back, he had cut off half of his neck with his sharpness spirit rune. At that time, Lu Yi was in a hurry to escape and didn't check the results, but judging from the number of merit points he gained, the fifth order weapon cultivator was indeed dead. Lu Yi threw the storage bag on a nearby table and sat down, taking out some water from his own storage bag and drinking it in big gulps. After a day and night of fighting, he was really tired. Hupo was now like a dog, sticking out his tongue, so Lu Yi fed him some water. He came out and walked to the side, opening the storage bag and counting it. She found that there were a total of 108 spirit stones inside. Her eyes began to shine. She had never seen so many spirit stones before. She was actually quite greedy, but not as greedy as Hua Xi. The main reason was that she and Hupa didn't have a way to make money before, so they could only barely survive by robbing low-level cultivators. It wasn't until they left Blue Cloud Mountain with Lu Yi that situation began to improve. Lu Yi was a little excited and didn't want to let go of the storage bag. What do they mean by this? Bribe us? He asked innocently. Lu Yi briefly explained to her about the Dragon Spring Society. As the party that is fighting 1 against 2, Green Feather Mountain can recruit some helpers. Most of them are rogue cultivators. As long as they don't ask for help from those who are on good terms with them, it doesn't count as a violation of the contract. Since we killed so many Tai Luo sect cultivators today, Green Feather Mountain naturally wants to recruit them. This information was recorded in the jade slip that Xie Jin had given him. When Lu Yi saw this, he had a faint guess in his heart. It wasn't until Xie Jin gave him so many spirit stones that he confirmed his guess. The reason why Green Feather Mountain had sent more than 20 cultivators to receive him was because they saw his value, and this value was earned by him killing his way through. If he didn't have such ability, Green Feather Mountain wouldn't have worried about his life or death. They weren't related to each other, and many cultivators died in the Spirit Stream battlefield every day. But from beginning to end, Green Feather Mountain didn't mention anything about recruitment. Instead, they sent a large number of people to receive him and put him here to heal. They even directly offered him the reward for killing the enemy. It had to be said that this was done beautifully. At the very least, it didn't make him feel disgusted. Tang Wu, Lu Yi remembered the name Xie Jin mentioned before. This person should be the 9th order cultivator from Green Feather Mountain. So it's like that? He understood the whole story. What do you think? Lu Yi didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "What do you think?" She looked down at the storage bag in her hand and slowly put it down. If it's too dangerous, I don't want it. It's too chaotic with 3 forces fighting here. Lee smiled. Actually, it's not that dangerous. The cultivators participating in the Dragon Spring Society are limited to the 2nd order to the 5th order. As long as you don't get besieged by too many 5th order cultivators at the same time, you should be fine. You want to participate? Yi tilted her head and looked at him. I want to sleep. Yi chuckled and suddenly looked outside the tent. Someone's coming. After saying that, she went into Hupo's body. A pleasant voice came from outside. Is Junior Brother Yi here? Please come in. The curtain was lifted and a young girl walked in. She looked about the same age as Yi, but she was much bigger than Yi in some places. She didn't dare to say that she was like a mountain range from the side, but at least she was bulging. She had a handkerchief on her head and was wearing something similar to an apron. There were many splashes of blood on the apron. Is this a medical cultivator from Green Feather Mountain? Lu Yi thought of Hua Si when he saw her. Hua Si was dressed like this when she saved people in the market. The young girl didn't treat him as an outsider. Perhaps she had received orders from above, but after seeing Lu Yi, she smiled and said, "I'm from Green Feather Mountain. My name is Mu Ling." Lu Yi got up and bowed. "Greetings, senior sister." Mu Ling smiled and said, "I'm here to check junior brother's injuries." Saying so, she walked to the side and took out something from her storage bag. Lu Yi said, "I don't have any injuries. Senior sister, please take a look at my pet beast. Its injuries are more serious." "That won't do." Mu Ling turned around. "Senior brother Tang Wu ordered me to treat junior brother well." With others being so enthusiastic, Lu Yi really couldn't refuse, so he could only follow their instructions. Fortunately, he really didn't have any injuries, and the external injuries he had suffered weren't serious, so he would be fine after some simple treatment. Only the final blow from the fifth-order weapon cultivator had caused him some internal injuries. However, that was only after the impact was blocked by the defensive spirit rune. After being treated by Mu Ling, he immediately felt much better. After carefully treating Lu Ye's injuries, Mu Ling began to treat Hu Po's injuries. The arrowheads inserted into Hu Po's body were pulled out one by one and then applied some herbs. After busying herself for more than half an hour, Mu Ling said goodbye and left. Before leaving, she left behind 2 healing pills, one for Lu Yi and one for Hu Po. Lu Yi didn't refuse, and after she left, he shared it with Hu Po. He popped out and stared at Lu Yi angrily. "What's wrong?" Lu Yi was puzzled by her stare. He didn't speak. "What's wrong?" Lu Yi was really confused. Yi turned her little head away. Lu Yi reached out to pinch her face and lifted it slightly. "If you have something to say, just say it." He suddenly let go and Yi hurriedly went into Hu Po's body. Someone else came. Wrapped in a fragrant wind, a voluptuous woman walked in and said softly, "Junior brother, it's time to treat your injuries." Lu Yi was stunned. "No. Just now," the woman said. "Just now is just now, now is now. Lie down on the bed." Lu Yi was secretly amazed. Just how much did Blue Feather Mountain value him that they had to treat him twice? But he really didn't have any injuries. Seeing that Lu Yi was still hesitating, the female cultivator urged, "Quickly lie down." Medical cultivators didn't seem to have a good temper. Lu Yi wanted to refuse, but the female cultivator had already pressed him down on the bed and then took off his clothes. Her soft little hands began to wander around Lu Ye's chest, and the female cultivator's eyes were blurred. "I didn't expect junior brother's chest to be so strong." She reached out and drew across the hideous scars and praised, "A man's battle achievements are really fascinating." Lu Yi felt that something was wrong. When the woman's hands continued to move, he quickly got up and grabbed her hands. "Senior sister, are you a medical cultivator of Blue Feather Mountain?" The woman winked at Lu Yi. "Medical cultivators only treat the body, but senior sister can treat the heart." Lu Yi suddenly remembered that this woman, wasn't she the one who winked at him when he came over with Xie Jin? This woman was definitely not a medical cultivator of Blue Feather Mountain. Lu Yi grabbed her hands and didn't let go, saying with a headache, "Senior sister, I'm injured." The female cultivator said, "These injuries are nothing. Life is short, and you should enjoy it while you can. When you go up the mountain tomorrow, you might die. Don't you think so, junior brother?" Lu Yi looked at the other's towering chest and couldn't help but nod. Senior sister's words are very reasonable. Suddenly feeling 2 pairs of eyes staring at him, Lu Yi looked up and met Hu Po and Yi's eyes. He was about to explode in anger, and silently pointed at him. Hu Po jumped up and bit down. The ground shook, and the female cultivator ran out of the tent cursing, one hand still rubbing her back. If it wasn't for Hu Po's mercy, that bite would have crippled her. The tent, which was originally tidy, was a mess, and the bed had collapsed. Lu Yi helplessly sat on the ground. Yi's cheeks were puffed up, and she glared at him, gritting her teeth. "What she said is very reasonable, right?" "Indeed, it is very reasonable." "What's reasonable about what she said?" "What she said is very reasonable." Lu Yi reached out his hand and gestured at his chest. He was fuming. She lowered her head and looked at her chest. Finally, with a loud cry, she plunged into Hu Po's body. Lu Yi and Hu Po looked at each other and finally decided to go get something to eat first. They had barely eaten for a day and night, so they were really a bit hungry, especially for two big eaters like them. He walked out of the tent and found a bonfire. He took out some beast meat from his storage bag and barbecued it. He hadn't even started eating when injured cultivators came one after another. Some came to give him meat, while others came to give him wine. They were very enthusiastic. Since coming to this world, Lu Yi had never encountered so many enthusiastic cultivators. Fortunately, those cultivators only put down their things and casually exchanged a few words before leaving. Lu Yi responded to them one by one, and it was quite appropriate. As expected of a disciple from a large sect, his bearing was really extraordinary, those cultivators thought to themselves. Chapter 122. The next day, in the valley, Lu Yi walked around with the medical cultivator named Mu Ling accompanying him. He was too bored from healing in the tent, so he came out for a walk and happened to meet Mu Ling. She offered to accompany him, so Lu Yi did not refuse. Along the way, they met many cultivators who greeted them warmly. It was natural for Mu Ling to be so popular. After all, she was a medical cultivator and had a good appearance, so it was easy for people to have a good impression of her. Now, all the cultivators in the Blue Feather Mountain camp knew that there was a fourth-order cultivator named Yi who single-handedly killed his way from the back of Tai Luo sect to Blue Feather Mountain's territory. It could be said that this feat made him famous overnight. The cultivators here were not just the cultivators of Green Feather Mountain. Nearly half of them were loose cultivators who had been recruited. These loose cultivators were treated very well. Every day, they had good wine and good food. If they were injured, they would be treated by medical cultivators. Every day, Green Feather Mountain would calculate their merits and give out the promised spirit stones as rewards. One merit was worth 2 spirit stones, and the spoils of war belonged to the rogue cultivator. Those with outstanding merits were even eligible to follow the Blue Feather Mountain disciples to the Dragon Spring after the Dragon Spring meeting. All these benefits could be seen and felt. Blue Feather Mountain had maintained a reputation in this regard for 15 years, so they could recruit many rogue cultivators to help before every Dragon Spring meeting. For those rogue cultivators, this was definitely a rare opportunity. As long as they could survive the Dragon Spring meeting, they could get a lot of cultivation resources. Life as a rogue cultivator was hard, and there weren't many ways to obtain resources. Many ambitious rogue cultivators were naturally willing to take a gamble. Participating in the Dragon Spring meeting was indeed risky, but in the Spirit Stream battlefield, where was there no risk? Although Lu Yi felt that Xie Jin would not lie to him, hearing about it was one thing, seeing it with his own eyes was another. Now it seemed that the information recorded in the jade slip Xie Jin gave him was true. The Dragon Spring meeting is not only related to the future of the disciples of the three forces, but it is also a game between the three forces. Therefore, no one dares to let down their guard and go all out every time. I know that junior brother Yi has an extraordinary background and probably doesn't care about those rewards. However, since we are both in the Haotian Alliance, if junior brother Yi is willing, please help Green Feather Mountain. Green Feather Mountain will be very grateful. Mu Ling naturally didn't meet Lu Yi by chance. Since Lu Yi was taken away by Qinyu Mountain the day before yesterday, Han Zhaoyue seemed to have gone crazy. He joined forces with the Qin family to put pressure on Qinyu Mountain without caring about the losses. Qinyu Mountain had no choice but to avoid the sharp edge and give up many mountains. Now they occupied less than 30 mountains. This made Tang Wu feel pressured. Originally, Tang Wu did not intend to persuade Lu Yi. Although he wanted to recruit him, if he did not persuade him properly, it would make him unhappy. So Tang Wu planned to let nature take its course. But now, the disciples of Blue Feather Mountain were agitated, and many of them were clamoring to fight with the two families. In such a situation, if they really fought, the two families would suffer, and Blue Feather Mountain would suffer heavy casualties. This was a result that Tang Wu could not accept. So he thought of Lu Yi. Mu Ling had been treating Lu Yi and Hu Po for the past 2 days. She was a medical cultivator and a woman, so it was best for her to persuade him. Even if Lu Yi did not have the intention to participate in the Dragon Spring meeting, he would not be disliked. Lu Yi was used to being mistaken for someone with an extraordinary background. He stopped in his tracks and pondered for a moment before saying, "Your sect has done me a favor, so I naturally have to repay it. I will participate in the Dragon Spring meeting." He did not intend to refuse the recruitment of Qinyu Mountain. Previously, more than 20 cultivators from Qinyu Mountain came to pick him up, which really saved him a lot of trouble. And now that he thought about it, Qinyu Mountain must have deliberately arranged a battle at that time, using the continuous roar to attract his attention and guide him in the direction of his escape. They were kind to him, and their intention to recruit him was very obvious. Lu Yi would naturally return the favor. What's more, participating in the Dragon Spring meeting was not that dangerous for him, and he could even take the opportunity to earn some cultivation resources. Although he still had many spirit pills on hand, and he could even cultivate all the way to the 5th order, he and Hoopa had consumed a lot. There would be a time when they would run out of magnetic ores. He had to plan ahead and find a way to collect future cultivation resources. The Dragon Spring meeting was an opportunity. Killing the 2 myriad Demon Ridge cultivators would not only give him some spoils of war, but he could also convert every merit point into spirit stones as a reward. Even if he killed a 2nd order cultivator, he would get 4 spirit stones, which would be enough for E to find herbs for several days. If he killed a 5th order cultivator, he would get an additional 10 spirit stones in addition to the merit point reward. That would be 30 spirit stones at once. How could Lu Yi refuse? He did not express his opinion before, mainly because he was recuperating and wanted to see with his own eyes if the treatment of rogue cultivators here was really as recorded in the Jade Slip. Now that he had confirmed it, and the other party had made it clear, Lu Yi could only agree. After getting a positive answer, Mu Ling was obviously pleasantly surprised. "Junior brother, are you serious?" She had prepared a lot of excuses to persuade him, but she did not expect that they would be useless. Lu Yi nodded. Mu Ling looked at him happily. "Then I will contact senior brother Tang Wu and tell him the good news. But I have a request." Lu Yi spoke again. "Speak." "Senior sister just said that the Dragon Spring meeting would last for a month? How many days have passed now?" Lu Yi asked. 7 days. That's too long. I have other things to do. My request is that I can withdraw from the Dragon Spring meeting at any time. Lu Yi did not intend to tie himself to Blue Feather Mountain. Everything could go wrong. If the situation was really bad, he could choose to leave at any time. As for having other things to do, it was naturally just an excuse. "No problem," Mu Ling promised. Then she started to fiddle with her battlefield imprint. In the main hall of the central peak, Tang Wu received the message. He raised his eyebrows and breathed a sigh of relief. With such a fierce general under his command, he did not dare to say that he could completely change the situation of Blue Feather Mountain, but at least he could stabilize it. As for the lost peaks, he could slowly take them back. At the moment, Han Zhaoyue was a little crazy, and the morale of the 2 opposing forces was high. It was not good to continue fighting. It would not be too late to fight back after a few days of waiting for their enthusiasm to die down. "What are you looking at? I'll dig out your eyeballs." Han Zhaoyue turned his head and shouted angrily at Tang Wu. Tang Wu said indifferently, "When will you give me the 200 merit points?" Han Zhaoyue snorted. "Who can prove which camp he belongs to? Anyway, I didn't see it with my own eyes, so it doesn't count." She was a little shameless. Lu Yi, that white, had already entered the territory of Blue Feather Mountain and stayed there for 2 days. There was no doubt that he belonged to the camp. But at night, Han Zhaoyue saw the white that suddenly turned blue, and his face became ugly. "Are you still going to act shamelessly?" Tang Wu asked. Han Zhaoyue turned his head. "Anyway, I didn't see it with my own eyes. You can say whatever you want." 200 merit points was not a small number for 9th order cultivators like them. How could Han Zhaoyue compromise so easily? She was a woman and they were enemies. So what if she pestered them endlessly? The fact that Heaven's Secret didn't punish her meant that she took advantage of the right loophole. Tang Wu only snorted and stopped pestering her. Han Zhaoyue, however, Did not give up. Don't think you can do anything just because you recruited this person. He is alone. The Dragon Spring Guild relies on numbers. There was nothing wrong with this because every mountain needed a cultivator to guard it. If there were few people, the strength would be too scattered, and it would be easy to be defeated one by one. This was also the reason why the Qin clan only occupied 25 mountains in the beginning. They did not have many people. Then let's wait and see. Tang Wu said indifferently, too lazy to argue with him. In the tent in the valley, Xie Jin rushed back to meet with Lu Yi and signed a contract. The contract stated that during the Dragon Spring Guild, Lu Yi would listen to the recruitment of Blue Feather Mountain and could withdraw at any time. As for the other rewards and punishments, they were all listed in detail. This was good, and Lu Yi was also satisfied. Junior brother Yi, do you want to defend or attack? Xie Jin put away the contract and asked. Tell me the details. Xie Jin explained, if you want to attack, you can arrange to be in the assault team or the hunting team. You will cooperate with other teams to occupy the mountain. You will also confront the cultivators of those two houses. It will be a difficult and dangerous job. If you want to defend, you can arrange to guard one of the mountain peaks. It will be more leisurely. If it is too dangerous, you can retreat. It was similar to what he had thought. Lu Yi said, attack? What was the point of just standing guard? It was still uncertain whether the other party would attack. Only by taking the initiative to attack would he be able to kill more enemies and earn more spirit stones. Wasn't the reason why he agreed to participate in the Dragon Spring meeting to earn more cultivation resources in the future? I knew junior brother would choose this. Xie Jin smiled. Coincidentally, my team is missing one person. Junior brother, come with me. Rest tonight and come find me tomorrow. As he said this, he raised his hand and wiped his battlefield mark. A dot of blue light flew towards Lu Yi. Lu Yi raised his hand and it fell into his mark. His second friend was born. As for his first friend, he had already deleted it. After handing over some matters, Xie Jin left. He emerged from Hu Po's body. Lu Yi, are we going to participate in the Dragon Spring Guild? You don't want to participate? Lu Yi asked. He shook her head. We will go wherever you go. The day before yesterday, she had thrown a tantrum with Lu Yi. However, she calmed down the next day. She was afraid that Lu Yi would be angry, so she was careful for a while. Only when she was sure that Lu Yi was normal did she relax. Lu Yi raised a hand and rubbed her head. They injured Hu Po so badly. We have to take revenge. It is impolite not to reciprocate. He nodded. You have a point. I don't have a point. In any case, let's beat them up. He was unwilling to discuss this with Lu Yi. This was a very sad topic. Chapter 123. During the Dragon Spring Conclave, most of the confrontations between the cultivators of the three great forces were small skirmishes in the form of small teams. In the past, they had also tried large-scale battles. That was to set up an area, and all the cultivators from each side would be thrown into that area, resulting in a fierce battle. But after two such attempts, the parties were no longer willing to continue. Because in such a battle, each side would suffer huge losses, and the cost would not be proportional to the benefits. Small skirmishes in the form of small teams were different. Casualties could be effectively controlled, and if the cultivators guarding the mountain peaks sensed that something was wrong, they could withdraw and preserve their strength. There were three types of teams. The first type was the defensive team, which sat on the mountain peaks to resist the enemy. The second type was the assault team, which took the initiative to attack and occupy the enemy's mountain. The third type was the hunting team, which wandered around and went wherever there was a good opportunity. If the opportunity was right, they would also cooperate with the assault team to launch an attack. Lu Yi was in the hunting team. There were only 5 people in the team, but all of them had good cultivation. Except for Xie Jin, who was in the 5th order, the other 3 were all in the 4th order. Because the hunting team was the easiest to fight with the enemy, the requirements for cultivation were relatively high. Not only that, all 5 of them had mounts, which made them very mobile. Before dawn, Lu Yi met up with Xie Jin and the others and got to know each other. There were 4 men and 1 woman in the team. What made Lu Ye's head hurt was that the woman who attacked him last night was also there. After seeing Lu Yi, her eyes lit up and she threw flirtatious glances at him from time to time. The woman was called Xiao Xiao, a recruited rogue cultivator. She was bold and unrestrained and dressed very boldly. The other two were called Song Xie and Tao Tiangang. Tao Tiangang was a disciple of Green Feather Mountain, and Song Xie was also a recruited rogue cultivator. Originally, there was a fourth-order cultivator from Green Feather Mountain in this team, but he was killed a few days ago, so Lu Yi filled the gap. Their mounts were all different. Some were riding wolves, some were riding leopards, and there was even a huge wild boar. The most outrageous one was Song Xie's mount. It was a huge scorpion. Its body was the size of a table, and it had a metallic luster. Its tail was raised up high, and it flickered with a cold light. Just by looking at it, one could tell it was not to be trifled with. It was unknown how Song Xie had managed to tame such a monster. Song Xie himself had a sickly appearance. His skin was green, and he looked like he would die soon. Lu Yi suspected that this guy would die at any moment. In the wilderness, it was quiet all around. 5 people and 5 mounts were quietly waiting for orders, each of them closing their eyes and adjusting their breathing. In less than half an hour, Xie Jin suddenly said, "Let's go." The 4 of them opened their eyes and mounted their mounts. Under Xie Jin's lead, they galloped in a certain direction. On a mountain top over there, a group of Green Feather Mountain cultivators were resisting the attacks of the Qin clan cultivators. The situation was extremely tense. Originally, the Qin clan had been watching the show, but after Han Jiyu lost his temper, Qin Wanli could only mobilize his own people to participate in the attack and put pressure on Green Feather Mountain. The task of Xie Jin's 5-man team was to cooperate with the cultivators guarding the mountain to launch a pincer attack on the people of the Qin clan. The powerful mobility of the hunting team was reflected in this. However, before they had gone far, Xie Jin shouted, "Meet the enemy." The other party's hunting team had also set out and was heading towards this side. It would not be long before the two teams met. After a while, the enemy's figures could be vaguely seen in front of them. The cultivators riding monster beasts were nimbly moving through the mountain forest. The distance between the two sides was quickly closing. Xie Jin took the lead, with Lu Yi and Xiao Xiao on his left and right. Song Xie and Tao Tiangang were further behind. The 5 people and 5 mounts rushed forward in an arrow formation. When they were still 300 feet apart, their spirit chi began to surge. It was unknown whether it was a tacit agreement or something else, but Xie Jin and the leading 5th-order cultivator each took out a golden will talisman. When the spirit talisman was activated, a golden arc slashed towards the opposite side. The sharp slashes caused the trees to fall down one by one. Slash marks were plowed on the ground as the cultivators of the two sides dodged the attacks. When the power of the spirit talisman was exhausted, the cultivators of the two sides were already facing each other head-on. 2 long whips swept out from their respective teams. The long whips flashed with light. They were clearly spirit artifacts. The long whips twisted together. Under the strength of each side, the two were pulled off their mounts at the same time. At the end of the long whip, Xiao Xiao looked at the 4th-order cultivator on the other side with disgust. "Why are men playing with whips? So shameless." That cultivator did not make a sound. He shook his long whip and released it from the restraints. He then attacked Xiao Xiao from head to toe. Xiao Xiao was not willing to be outdone. The two of them immediately engaged in battle. Even their mounts began to bite each other. While the two were fighting fiercely, the others were not idle either. The moment their figures crossed each other, at least 6 people from the two teams were knocked off their mounts. In fact, cultivators were not used to riding their mounts to fight. The biggest use of a mount was that it was a means of transportation, followed by support in battle. It was difficult to display one's strength while riding a mount. Lu Yi also fell to the ground, but he took the initiative to roll down. In the head-on collision just now, a 4th-order cultivator on the other side was cut down by his saber. Although he was not injured, he was still in a difficult position. When he finally stood up, Lu Yi rushed forward with his saber and slashed at the man's neck. The man's reaction was not slow. He quickly raised the spirit artifact in his hand to block, but the saber did not completely fall. The long saber stopped in front of the other party's spirit artifact. His spirit chi surged. The man suddenly looked up and saw Lu Yi raising his hand towards him. There was a faint red glow in his palm. The sound of flapping wings rang out. A fat bird suddenly appeared and slammed into the cultivator's chest. With a bang, spirit chi exploded. A scorching aura spread out. The cultivator screamed and was sent flying. His chest was a bloody mess. A bright saber light flashed across his eyes. The man was shocked and pushed his spirit chi to the limit. However, he only felt a slight pain in his neck before his vision began to fade. Lu Yi had already put away his saber. He found that with the help of his spirit chi, killing enemies was much easier than before. In the past, even if he could kill a fourth-order cultivator like this, it would take him a while. Cultivators were not fish on the chopping block. They also had weapons in their hands that could block fatal attacks. But once he used his spirit chi, it would be difficult for the other party to block unless they had some kind of defensive spirit talisman. Taking advantage of the confusion, Lu Yi could naturally cut them down however he wanted. Almost in the blink of an eye, a fourth-order cultivator was killed by his spirit chi. The other's battle had just begun, but Lu Yi's was already over. Pushing off with his feet, Lu Yi rushed to the nearest battlefield in a few steps. Here, Xie Jin was fighting a fifth-order cultivator. Both of them were artifact cultivators. As soon as they met, they got off their mounts and fought in close combat. However, their strength was equal, so it was difficult to determine the winner. Suddenly, the fifth-order cultivator felt a chill run down his back. When a strong wind blew, he hurriedly lowered his head and felt a chill on the top of his head. His hair was blown away, and a piece of his scalp had been cut off. When he looked up again, he saw who had attacked him. Not far away, there was a clansman lying in a pool of blood. His heart shook. One of them died just like that. Suddenly remembering the news he had received before, he looked at Lu Yi in horror. "It's you?" He finally remembered that 2 days ago, a guy had killed his way through Tai Luo sect's territory on his own. That person seemed to be riding a big white tiger. It was said that more than a dozen people from Tai Luo sect had died, including a fifth-order cultivator. He did not recognize Lu Yi before because the Qin family had not been in contact with him before. Xie Jin was not easy to deal with, and now that such a vicious person had appeared to help him, how could he be his opponent? He immediately thought of retreating. However, it was not so easy to retreat at this moment. Lu Yi and Xie Jin attacked together, forcing the fifth-order cultivator to retreat. In just 10 breaths, the fifth-order cultivator's back was wide open. Lu Yi's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He slashed out with his saber, which flashed with light and was reinforced by spirit inscriptions. When the saber fell, the fifth-order cultivator's stomach was cut open. He screamed and fell to the ground. The long sword in Xie Jin's hand trembled and directly pierced his opponent's wrist, severing his tendons. With a clang, the weapon fell to the ground. Lu Yi flipped his saber and stabbed it directly into his opponent's heart. When he pulled out his saber, blood spurted out. In the next moment, Lu Yi and Xie Jin rushed to the left and right respectively. There were still 2 fights going on there. Lu Yi rushed to Qiao Qiao's battlefield. She and the male cultivator danced with their long whips, which flashed with light. Half of Qiao Qiao's face was swollen, and the whip mark was very conspicuous. However, her opponent was not much better. She did not know what kind of injury he had suffered. At this moment, his posture was a bit strange. His legs were clamped together, and his face was as pale as paper. Seeing that they had lost 2 people, and the strongest fifth-order cultivator was dead, the male cultivator knew that he did not have much time left. He took Qiao Qiao's whip head-on, and his skin was torn open. He took out a spirit talisman from his storage bag and threw it at her. The spirit talisman exploded, turning into 3 slashes that arrived in front of Qiao Qiao in an instant. Qiao Qiao wanted to dodge, but she could not. She hurriedly retreated and wanted to take out a golden body talisman from her storage bag. At this moment, a figure suddenly rushed in front of her. A light flashed, and a shield-like object blocked in front of her. Asterisk doo-doo-doo. Asterisk the 3 slashes fell, but they did not shake the shield at all. With the crisis resolved, Xiao blinked and looked at the figure in front of her. She pursed her lips and smiled, but the injuries on her face made her smile look a little terrifying. A rumbling sound rang out as a wild boar rushed over. The male cultivator with the whip had just been hit by Xiao's whip, and his bones were broken. There was no way he could dodge. With a bang, the wild boar knocked the male cultivator into the air. The fangs at the corner of its mouth scraped off a piece of flesh. When he landed, the fourth-order cultivator could only gasp for breath. Xiao lashed out with her whip, and the angry whip directly exploded the man's head. It was like cracking a watermelon. On the other side, Song Xie coughed lightly. Beside him, there was a person stuck in the tail of the giant scorpion. The person was raised high, and that person was not dead yet. He was still struggling violently, blood and internal organs spilling out. The scene was bloody. Chapter 124. Lu Ye's squad consisted of 5 people, and the Qin clan squad also consisted of 5 people. Not only were they the same number of people, but their cultivations were also the same. It wasn't that both sides didn't want to deploy better teams, but rather that they simply didn't have enough manpower. The entire 100 Peak Mountain was extremely large, and each clan had several hunting squads like Lu Ye's, each responsible for their own region. In less than half a cup of tea's time, 4 of the 5 people in the squad had died, leaving only the last 4th-order cultivator who was forced to flee. This 4th-order cultivator being able to escape wasn't because he was stronger, but rather because his luck was better. In the initial collision he hadn't been knocked off his mount, and when he wanted to help, he saw Lu Yi killing his fellow tribesmen. At that time, he had a bad feeling, and after Lu Yi and Xie Jin joined forces to kill the 5th-order cultivator, he didn't hesitate to flee. Tao Tiangang chased after him, but it was probably useless. Lu Ye's opponent had a mount, so if he wanted to run, it would be difficult to catch up. Amidst the bloody ground, Xie Jin and the others looked at each other, all of them filled with disbelief. We won just like that? Isn't that a bit too easy? Previously, they had fought with the enemy's hunting teams many times, but every time they fought, the sky was dark and the ground was dark. The situation was tense, and when both sides had similar numbers and cultivation levels, it was actually very difficult to determine the winner. But this time, not only had they won, but they had also killed 4 of their enemies. On their side, except for Xiao, who had suffered some injuries, everyone else was almost unscathed. The gap between before and after was huge. Several people couldn't help turning their eyes to Lu Yi, thinking back to the battle just now. Lu Yi had taken the lead to kill a 4th-order cultivator, opening a gap, and then he had gone to help Xie Jin, killing the enemy 5th-order cultivator in just a few moves, allowing them to achieve a complete victory. He was worthy of being the one who had single-handedly killed his way through Tai Luosek's territory. Although they had heard of Lu Ye's feats before and admired him greatly, they had always felt that there was a lot of luck involved. But now, they realized that it wasn't just luck. Without corresponding strength, no matter how good one's luck was, it wouldn't have been enough. The enemy's 4th-order cultivator had died too quickly, making it easy for Blue Feather Mountain's side to become outnumbered. Xie Jin let out a long sigh of relief. Lu Ye's first battle after joining the team was already so eye-catching. This made him feel relieved. He finally understood why senior brother Tang Wu valued this person so much. He nodded slightly to Lu Yi and said, 30 breaths, clean up the battlefield. Everyone immediately took action. In the previous battle, not only had this hunting team of the Qin family lost 4 martial artists, one of their demonic beasts had also been bitten to death by Hupe. It was the demonic beast ridden by the first martial artist killed by Lu Yi. As for the other demonic beasts, they had all escaped. Without a master to control them, they would not return to the Qin family. Instead, they would wander around the 100 Peak Mountain until they were captured or killed by some martial artist. One could say that this confrontation had directly destroyed one of the Qin clan's hunting teams. This would be a great help to the future situation. Lu Yi stepped forward and hurriedly dismembered the demonic beast that had been bitten to death by Hu Pe, putting it into his storage bag. This thing could be used as rations for him and Hu Pe. Eating it was very nutritious. After 30 breaths, everyone was ready to go. Still, Xie Jin rode in the front and led the four of them to rush towards a mountain peak. That mountain peak was their original mission target. At this moment, the battle on that mountain peak was already in full swing. People of the Green Feather Mountain were guarding the mountain peak, and people of the Qin were attacking. Since the territory of the Green Feather Mountain had been reduced to less than 30 peaks, the number of martial artists guarding the mountain peak had increased and they were putting up a strong defense. It was not realistic for the Qin to take down this mountain peak. They did not expect to take it down either. They were mainly putting on a show for the Tai Luo sect. Since that woman Han Zhaoyue was still angry, the Qin could only do this since they had to act according to other people's wishes. Initially, with the hunting team of the Qin clan stopping the hunting team of the Green Feather Mountain, such an attack would not be too dangerous. However, as soon as the two hunting teams had made contact, 4 of the red light spots that symbolized the Qin clan had been annihilated. Only one of them had escaped without a trace. This made Qin Wanli, who had been paying attention to the situation on this side, turn pale with fright. He immediately ordered the assault team to retreat because if they did not retreat, they would be surrounded by the Green Feather Mountain. The Green Feather Mountain side had also been suppressing a lot of anger in the past 2 days. One mountain peak after another had been taken and many of their fellow disciples had died in battle. This made their eyes red with anger. Since the Qin family had come to cause trouble, of course they had to fight back. The defending side had the geographical advantage, plus they had more people. This time, the Green Feather Mountain's morale was high. Originally, they only needed to drive the Qin family away to complete their mission. However, as the order was passed down, the leading 5th Order martial artist raised his arm and shouted, "Kill!" With a crash, more than half of the defending cultivators chased after them. The two sides kept exchanging blows on the way down the mountain. The power of spirit talismans and techniques flew back and forth. The assault team of the Qin family finally retreated to the foot of the mountain. Then a rumbling sound came from one side. The leading cultivator looked over and saw 5 riders charging out from the other side. He immediately felt a chill run down his spine. Of course, it was the hunting team led by Xie Jin. 5 people and 5 mounts formed that arrow-shaped charging formation and rushed into the Qin group. With a burst of clanking sounds, a few martial artists with low strength fell into a pool of blood on the spot. Xie Jin did not dismount from his mount. Instead, he turned around and led Lu Yi and the others to charge again, completely disrupting the Qin family's formation. After 2 charges, everyone was more or less injured. Only then did they dismount from their mounts and look for their targets. Lu Yi ran at the edge of the battlefield with his saber. The light of the defensive spirit inscriptions kept flashing on his body, blocking one attack after another. With a slash of his saber, a cultivator in front of him fell to the ground, blood splashing a few feet away. It was not that the Qin family did not have 5th Order martial artists, but they only had 2. Most of them were 2nd or 3rd Order. Such cultivation was like paper in front of Lu Yi. He did not dare to say that he could kill a kid with 1 slash, but with 2 or 3 slashes, few people could block it. If they tried to block it, even their weapons would be broken. From time to time, he would also cast a spell. Although he was only a 4th Order martial artist, any cultivator targeted by him would not survive more than 3 breaths. Cries, shouts, and curses rang out, mixing in this chaotic battlefield. The Qin family suffered a huge loss. On the shadow moon disk, one red dot after another was annihilated. Qin Wanli's eyelids twitched. Han Zhiyu's expression was also extremely solemn. Since the start of the Dragon Spring Conference, there had never been such a bizarre loss in a battle. In the past, in every battle, even if one side suffered losses, the losses would not be too great. The side with the upper hand would not insist on fighting because it was easy to put themselves in danger. But in this short period of time, only half of the Qin family's assault team was left. Looking at the situation, their numbers were still decreasing rapidly. They fought and retreated, climbing the mountain behind them. That was the mountain peak occupied by the Qin family. The team stationed there had already rushed over to help, but it would still take a little bit of time. At this moment, Lu Yi found a fifth order. In the reward system of Green Feather Mountain, the reward for killing a fifth order was the highest. Not only was there a reward of 20 spirit stones, but there was also an additional 10 spirit stones. Now, he had 30 spirit stones, which was enough to buy 3 bottles of spirit accumulation pills. He looked at the fifth order in front of him, whose face was covered in blood, as if he was looking at a pile of glittering spirit stones. Participating in the Dragon Spring Conference was not only to take advantage of the situation, but also to accumulate future cultivation resources. Of course, Lu Yi would not let go of the opportunity to kill the enemy's fifth order. Lu Ye's long saber slashed down. The fifth order also had a fierce look on his face. Relying on his higher cultivation, he fearlessly clashed with Lu Yi, but soon he paid the price for this. Because his attacks were basically blocked by Lu Ye's spirit rune, but when Lu Yi slashed him, he could not resist at all. In just 10 breaths of time, this person was covered in blood. If he had not put a golden body talisman on his body in time, he would have died. He looked at Lu Yi with a face full of disbelief. There was only one thought in his mind. What kind of spirit artifact did Lu Yi have? Why was it so sharp? Before he could finish his thought, Lu Yi raised his hand. Spiritual energy surged, and a fat bird flew towards him. The man reacted quickly and immediately dodged. The fat bird brushed past the man's body, but there was already a flaw. Lu Ye's saber slashed down. Having experienced the sharpness of Lu Ye's saber, the man did not dare to meet it head-on. He rolled on the ground and dodged in embarrassment. Just as he stood up, a long whip curled around his neck. The long whip flickered with spiritual light, and he was forcefully pulled back. The man was immediately pulled up into the air. Lu Yi quickly stepped forward and slashed 3 times at the man's airborne body. The first slash dimmed the light of his golden body talisman, the second slash broke the protection of the golden body talisman, and the third slash directly cut his body. When he fell to the ground, his blood instantly dyed the ground red and he was no longer breathing. Lu Yi looked up and saw Qiao Qiao holding a long whip and winking at him. Coupled with the bloodstains and swollen cheeks on this woman's face, it was an eyesore. "Be careful," Qiao Qiao shouted. A long spear stabbed from behind Lu Yi, aiming for the back of his head. However, the long spear was blocked by the spirit rune. Lu Yi turned around and raised his arm, clamping down on the long spear. The tip of his saber brushed against the long spear and sliced out. Half of his palm flew out and the cultivator who attacked Lu Yi screamed and retreated. A Green Feather Mountain disciple came out from the side and took his life with a sword. In such a chaotic battle, a person's ability to adapt was tested the most. A little carelessness could lead to death on the spot. Bandits of the Green Feather Mountain, don't be so arrogant. Suddenly, a loud shout came from not far away. It was the disciples of the nearby Qin clan who had come to help. They had rushed over here after receiving the order. Initially, they thought they could cooperate with the assault team and make a sudden attack. However, when they arrived, they saw that not many people from the assault team were left. In that chaotic battlefield, more than 30 martial artists of the Green Feather Mountain were bathed in blood. Each of them had a murderous intention. The ground was filled with the corpses and broken limbs of the Qin clan martial artists. Fresh blood had dyed the ground red. In such hell, everyone from the Green Feather Mountain turned around to look at the source of the voice. Each pair of eyes emitted red lights. That martial artist who had shouted felt his scalp go numb, and the Qin disciples who had come to help also stopped. Quick! Retreat! Chapter 125. The Qin clan's defending team rushed to the edge of the battlefield. They only took a glance from afar before hurriedly retreating. It was not that they were timid, but the difference in numbers was too great. They had more than a dozen people on their side. Originally, as long as they could meet up with the attacking team, they would have a chance to fight back. However, the attacking team had died too quickly. By the time they arrived, there were only a few people left in the attacking team. Under such circumstances, even if they forced their way through, there would not be any good results. Choosing to retreat was the best option. The 30 or so people from Blue Feather Mountain were not in a hurry to chase after them. Instead, they spread out and surrounded the attacking team members of the Qin clan. These people were now in a circle with their backs against each other. They were extremely desperate. However, no one begged for mercy because everyone knew that begging for mercy was useless. They were on opposite sides. Plus, with the enmity from all these years, begging for mercy would only lead to the enemy's ridicule. Kill. There was still a fifth order who managed to survive, but he was seriously injured. With a shout, he led his remaining clansmen in a certain direction. Facing such enemies who were like cornered beasts, naturally no one would be stupid enough to confront them head-on. It was not worth it to be accidentally dragged to the grave with them. What greeted them was a series of techniques. After a cultivator reached the fifth order, they could basically determine their own faction. At the fourth order, they were already preparing for their future path. Therefore, if a cultivator at this level wanted to walk the path of a magic cultivator, they would have already begun to study techniques. However, because their cultivation was still low and they were not proficient in casting techniques, it was difficult for them to cast a complete technique in a fierce battle. However, before the Qin clan people made their move, they were already preparing to cast their techniques. At this moment, it was just the right time to cast them. There were less than 10 techniques, colorful lights, and all kinds of attributes. Among them, a fat firebird was the most eye-catching. As the techniques fell, several Qin clan cultivators died on the spot, leaving only the fifth order. Covered in cuts and bruises, this guy rushed in front of a rogue cultivator recruited by Blue Feather Mountain, unable to even circulate his spirit energy to protect his body. That person laughed and said, "Serves me right for getting rich." At the same time, he stabbed his spear and pierced through the fifth order cultivator. Several people nearby looked at this guy enviously, mainly because this guy was only a third order cultivator, but killing a fifth order cultivator was worth 15 merit points. Including the reward from Blue Feather Mountain, this spear strike had earned him 40 spirit stones. 4 rogue cultivators, 40 spirit stones was a great fortune. When their cultivation was not high, it was enough to cultivate for 2 or 3 months. You still have strength? Xie Jin turned his head to look at Lu Yi. Lu Yi was wiping the blood off his blade on a corpse at his feet and nodding silently. He then looked at the other members of the hunting team. Song Xie coughed violently as if he was about to die. Panting heavily, he said, "I can't do anything else. Killing is the only thing I still have strength." What kind of logic was this? Xie Jin smiled. "Since you all still have strength, let's chase." The battle naturally would not end so simply. For the people of Blue Feather Mountain, the battle had just begun. The 5 of them summoned their mounts and Xie Jin signaled to one of his fifth-order cultivators before leading Lu Ye's group towards the opposite mountain peak. Then, the fifth-order cultivator led the members of his hunting team and quickly followed. Just now, the Qin clan attacked Blue Feather Mountain. Now, it was Blue Feather Mountain's turn to fight back. The speed of the martial artists was still fast. Lu Yi and the others only saw the figures of the Qin disciples when they were halfway up the mountain. Hearing the movements behind them, the people of the Qin turned around to look, and all of them turned pale with fright. For a time, the scene was somewhat chaotic. The fifth-order cultivator immediately roared, "Don't panic. Get into formation. There are only 5 of them. They are Blue Feather Mountain's hunting team." It had to be said that his response was not wrong. If they scattered at this time, it would only give Lu Yi and the others a chance to take them down one by one. The hunting team's mobility was undoubtedly stronger than theirs. However, Xie Jin had no intention of rushing up. He reined in his mount a few dozen meters away and just looked at the fifth-order cultivator from afar. For eyes met, and the fifth-order cultivator's heart thumped. He roughly understood Xie Jin's plan. The hunting team was obviously delaying them. There was still the Blue Feather Mountain hunting team behind them. If they did not retreat, when the Blue Feather Mountain hunting team arrived, they would not be able to escape even if they wanted to. Retreat slowly. Thinking so, the fifth-order cultivator roared again. the mountain guarding team retreated in an orderly manner. Just as they moved, Xie Jin led Lu Yi and the others to rush over. "Steady!" that Fifth Order master shouted again, and the Qin clan's group immediately took up a defensive position. Unexpectedly, the 5 riders from Blue Feather Mountain actually circled around 300 meters away and disappeared without a trace. When they were about to retreat, the 5 people and 5 riders popped their heads out again and watched from afar. This happened again and again, causing the Qin clan's group to suffer greatly. The Fifth Order cultivator's face was as black as the bottom of a pot as he cursed Xie Jin in his heart. The feeling of being led by the nose by the enemy like this was very unpleasant. Fortunately, just now, he had received a message that the mountain guarding team had come down to support them. As long as they could meet up with them, they would have no problem blocking the Blue Feather Mountain hunting team's attack. Just wait for reinforcements. He made up his mind. However, the next message he received made his heart sink to the bottom of the valley. Because the Blue Feather Mountain hunting team did not attack them. Instead, they went around them and went straight to the top of the mountain. They were also part of the mountain guarding team, but they received orders to support their own mountain guarding team. Unfortunately, they did not help much and retreated. In other words, the mountain guarding team was divided into 2 groups. One group was with them, and the other group was on their way to support them. Both groups had a dozen people each, totaling about 30 people. And the Blue Feather Mountain hunting team went straight to that group. The 3 forces all had 9th Order cultivators monitoring the shadow moon disk, so the movements of the cultivators of each force could not be hidden from others. However, there was definitely a slight delay in the transmission of messages. It was also for this reason that the casualties of the cultivators of the 3 forces during the Dragon Spring Conference were under control. When the situation was bad, Tang Wu and the others would make certain adjustments and would not easily send their cultivators to their deaths. However, in the previous battle, they had surpassed the control of the 9th Order cultivators for the first time. Qin Wanli, who was overseeing the shadow moon disk, did not expect that 4 of his hunting team would die so quickly. As a result, when he ordered the hunting team to retreat, it was already too late. One wrong move led to many mistakes. At this moment, the Blue Feather Mountain hunting team went straight to the top of the mountain. There were less than 30 of them, while the Qin clan only had a dozen. The difference in numbers was huge. If a confrontation happened, the Qin clan would suffer heavy casualties. Where are those guys? The 5th Order cultivator of the Qin clan looked around, but could not see the figures of Xie Jin and the others. Next to him, a junior brother said weakly, "They haven't appeared yet?" "Oh no." The 5th Order cultivator suddenly realized something and wondered if those 5 had also run to attack the other part of the mountain guarding team. If that was the case, the situation would be very bad. Hurry up and leave. At the same time, he sent out a message to inquire about the movements of those 5 people. In just 5 breaths, he received a reply, "They are above you." Just as he finished investigating this news, he heard the sound of demonic beasts galloping. Looking up, he saw the 5 people from Green Feather Mountain charging towards him with murderous intent. "Activate your talismans, you must block them," he roared. Shwa 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 shwa. In an instant, 7 or 8 spirit talismans were activated and shot upwards. The power of these spirit talismans bloomed fiercely. However, Lu Yi and the others were already prepared, so the moment the other party activated their spirit talismans, they scattered and relied on the speed of their mounts to avoid the attacks of the spirit talismans. After the first round of spirit talismans, except for Song Xie who was unlucky and was sent flying, the other 4 were scared but not hurt. However, Song Xie immediately got up and seemed to be fine. Again, as the 5th Order cultivator shouted, another round of spirit talismans was shot out. However, this attack was even more ineffective than the previous one because Lu Yi and the others had already used the trees to block. When the second wave of spirit talismans stopped, Lu Yi and the others appeared one after another. Spirit energy fluctuations spread from their bodies and each of them held a spirit talisman in their hands. The spirit talismans were provided by Xie Jin. It had to be said that Blue Feather Mountain was very generous in terms of supplies. 5 spirit talismans were activated, and fire snakes, wind blades, and icicles smashed towards the Qin clan cultivators. Xiao Xiao activated a golden will talisman. In front of her was a golden disc the size of a wash basin. She aimed it at the Qin clan and bombarded them indiscriminately. Although the Qin clan cultivators tried to dodge, they did not have mounts, so their mobility was naturally not as good as Lu Yi and the others. After a round of spirit talismans, one of the dozen or so people died on the spot, and a few others were injured. The chaotic situation opened up, and before the Qin clan had time to catch their breath, the sound of monster beasts galloping could be heard again. The Fifth Order cultivator looked up and saw Lu Yi and the others rushing towards them. At this time, the originally tight formation was in chaos and could not be reorganized in a hurry. Facing this kind of charge, it was really difficult for the Qin clan to resist. When the two figures passed by each other, Lu Yi raised his blade and a huge head flew. Song Xie's giant scorpion tail poked a figure, causing screams to ring out. The long whip in Xiao Xiao's hand wrapped around a cultivator and she was dragged to the ground, but she was quickly broken free. Xie Jin and Tao Tiangang did not succeed, but the former blocked the enemy's Fifth Order cultivator and the latter also diverted some of the enemy's attention. The 5 people and 5 mounts rushed out a few dozen meters and circled around under Xie Jin's lead. In a moment, they returned to the top of the Qin clan disciples and the second round of attacks began. Chapter 126. After a stick of incense worth of time, the battle subsided and the 5 mounts licked their wounds. Lu Ye's group of 5 each leaned against a tree, either healing or adjusting their breathing. The corpses of the Qin family disciples were scattered all around. The Fifth Order died the most miserably because he was the last one to survive. He was besieged by Lu Yi and the others and his body was cut into several pieces. In less than half a day, the hunting team had fought 3 battles in a row. First, they encountered the enemy's hunting team. Then, they joined forces with their own team to destroy the enemy's assault team. Now, with the 5 of them, they destroyed half of the enemy's team. It was a fruitful battle. In such frequent and intense confrontations, both the riders and their mounts were injured. Fortunately, their injuries were not serious. Thank you. Xiao Xiao's soft body leaned over and she thanked Lu Yi. Just now, when they were besieging the Fifth Order, Lu Yi clearly had a chance to kill him, but he left the opportunity for someone else to deal the final blow. In the end, Xiao Xiao was lucky and managed to kill him, earning her 30 spirit stones. In these 3 battles, the one who had killed the most was undoubtedly Lu Yi. Of the entire team's harvest, he alone accounted for 30%. In the final desperate struggle against the Fifth Order Origin Realm Master, it was Lu Yi who stood in the front and blocked the other party's attack. Otherwise, even if they were able to kill the other party, they would have to pay a heavy price, and it was likely that some of them would be buried with him. Lu Ye's harvest was not small. Of course, he would not be too greedy. Everyone had risked their lives to come here. No one had more lives than the other. If possible, he was willing to help others. It was not easy to be a rogue cultivator. You deserve it. Lu Yi responded casually while recovering his spirit qi. He moved his body slightly to the side. This woman's enthusiasm was a little unbearable. Xiao Xiao moved closer to him and whispered, "Elder sister will find you tonight." A big white head suddenly squeezed between the two and a pair of breathtaking tiger eyes stared at Xiao Xiao. Of course I didn't say anything. Xiao Xiao quickly got up and covered her but with her hands. She walked to the side and sat down. She remembered the unpleasant memories from last night. This scene made Song Xie, who was healing his wounds, laugh out loud. As he laughed, he could not stop coughing. Xiao Xiao's gaze was as sharp as a knife. Cough until you die. Not far away, there were rustling sounds and waves of spiritual energy fluctuations. Xie Jin raised his hand and said, "Don't panic. We're on the same side." It was indeed their own people. The assault team had already taken down this mountain peak and killed many people, so they hurried over to provide support. When the Fifth Order Origin Realm leader arrived, he was dumbfounded. They're all dead. Initially, they thought it would be a tough battle. After all, the hunting team only had 5 people, and the Qin clan had more than a dozen people. Even if the hunting team had mounts, at most, they could only delay the other party here. On the way here, they were already prepared to fight a big battle. In the end, when they arrived, they realized the battle had already ended. Looking at the number of corpses around him, the fifth-order cultivator sucked in a breath of cold air. The enemy had been completely wiped out. How could his hunting team be so powerful? He hadn't noticed it before. The fifth-order Origin Realm Master looked at Xie Jin in shock. Xie Jin gestured to him with his lips, and the Origin Realm Master immediately understood. It wasn't that his hunting team was strong, but that there was one more fierce person in the team. In the previous few rounds, Lu Yi could kill at least one enemy cultivator each time. If he was lucky, he could kill 2, but the others didn't have this ability. After a few times, the Qin clan's defending team no longer had the strength to resist. They also wanted to scatter and escape, but without mounts, they couldn't escape at all. The fifth-order Origin Realm Master was a little annoyed. In order to support Xie Jin's team in time, they had let 7 or 8 Qin clan cultivators escape. If they had known the battle would end so quickly, they would have killed the other party. But now, the result wasn't bad. Xie Jin and the fifth-order Origin Realm Master had a simple discussion, and the assault team returned to the mountain peak and temporarily defended it. Xie Jin led Lu Yi and the others back to his own territory. The 5 people and mounts all needed medical treatment. Moreover, the successive battles had consumed a lot of energy, so they needed to recover well. After crossing 2 mountains, when they arrived at the 3rd peak, tents had already been set up. This was the peak of Blue Feather Mountain, and there were more than 20 people responsible for guarding it. However, Lu Yi saw Mu Ling's figure here, and 2 other people who seemed to be medical cultivators. He immediately understood that Blue Feather Mountain had brought these medical cultivators here to make it easier to treat them. One had to know that this was a very dangerous thing. Although medical cultivators had the power to protect themselves, they were still weaker than cultivators of the same level. If this mountain peak was attacked by Tai Luo sect or the Qin clan, these medical cultivators would definitely not be able to escape. Inside the tent, Mu Ling carefully treated Lu Yi and Hu Po's injuries. After being busy, she was dripping with sweat. The man and tiger's injuries weren't serious. After being treated by Mu Ling and taking healing pills, they were more or less healed by the next day. On the next day, once again, Xie Jin led everyone to kill their way out. However, this time, they did not have the chance to fight with the hunting team of the Qin clan. The hunting team of the Qin clan seemed to be avoiding them. Even the original hunting team had been assigned to the mountain guarding team. Lu Yi and the others could only cooperate with their own attacking team to take over the enemy's mountain. Like a hot knife through butter, one mountain peak after another was taken down. In just 3 short days, the Qin clan had lost 8 mountain peaks. Initially, the Qin clan had only occupied 25 mountain peaks. Previously, they had snatched 2 from the Green Feather Mountain. Now, not only had they given up all of them, they had also lost 6. Inside the main palace of the central mountain peak, Qin Wanli's expression had turned ugly as if his father had died. From the situation on the Shadow Moon Plate, among the 100 mountain peaks, the Qin clan only had 19 left. Of the 32 Green Feather Mountain peaks, the Tai Luo sect had occupied the majority with a total of 49 peaks. They had occupied almost half of the total. This number was terrifying. For your information, in the past, even when the Green Feather Mountain held the upper hand, they had only taken down 46 mountain peaks at most. The number of 49 had already broken the previous record. Such situation had occurred mainly because in these 3 days, the Green Feather Mountain had been attacking the Qin clan's territory while giving up their own. Each time when the Supreme Luo sect sent an assault team to attack, the defending team would retreat ahead of time and give up their own mountain peaks. This way, they could avoid some unnecessary losses and ensure the combat power of the defending team. Tang Wu's goal was simple. He would not fight with the Supreme Luo sect first and cripple the Qin clan. When he had the time, he would take care of the Supreme Luo sect. Qin Wanli was not an idiot, and how could he not see through this point? Yet, what could he do? The rules were laid out here, and those mountain peaks represented the spots to enter the Dragon Spring. The Qin clan could not refuse. Senior brother Tang, isn't this going too far? Qin Wanli looked at Tang Wu with a worried expression. How is it going too far? Tang Wu said lightly, the Green Feather Mountain has acted within the rules and did not break the contract. How is it going too far? If the Qin clan wants a share of the Dragon Spring, of course you must pay the price. Inwardly, Qin Wanli thought that this price was too great. In these 3 days of battle, more than 100 of his disciples had died. How could the Qin clan endure such torment? From the Shadow Moon Plate, another group of blue light spots headed towards the mountain peak where the red light spots were stationed. Clearly, they were going to attack. When he compared the number and strength of both sides, Qin Wanli gave a long sigh. This time, they would not be able to defend. He did not know how many people would die. His expression changed a few times as he said in a low voice, Senior brother Tang, the Qin clan wants 18 mountain peaks. Tang Wu raised his eyes to look at him and curled the corner of his mouth. Okay. Qin Wanli let out a breath and immediately initiated the battlefield mark to send out an order. In a short moment, the red light spots on that mountain peak started to retreat. A group of blue light spots surged up the mountain peak and occupied it effortlessly. Qin Wanli secretly glanced at Han Jiyu. Indeed, he saw that Han Jiyu was glaring at him. He could only smile helplessly. The Qin clan could not take it anymore. A moment ago, when he asked Tang Wu for 18 mountain peaks, he meant that he would not go out and cause trouble in the future. Tang Wu agreed to this request. Thus, the remaining matter would be the battle between the Green Feather Mountain and the Supreme Luo sect. This naturally made Han Jiyu very unhappy. But so what? The Qin clan had originally been watching the show from the sidelines, but Han Jiyu had insisted that they intervene. This intervention not only caused many clan members to be injured or killed, but also resulted in the loss of only 18 mountain peaks. On the other hand, the Supreme Luo sect not only did not suffer any losses, but also occupied nearly half of the mountain peaks. Han Jiyu clearly knew the Qin clan's concerns. A clan that had only risen for 30 years was not as strong as the two clans. Thus, she did not intend to force Qin Wanli to do anything. She only glared at him and then turned to look at Tang Wu. Despicable. Useless roar. Tang Wu said indifferently. Han Jiyu was furious. Come and fight if you dare. What kind of man are you if you always avoid fighting? Are all of you turtles from the Green Feather Mountain? You want to fight? Tang Wu turned to look at her. Then as you wish. As soon as he finished speaking, the situation on the Shadow Moon disk suddenly changed. At the intersection of the two clans' territories, wave after wave of blue light spots moved out and attacked the mountain peaks occupied by the black light spots. A mocking smile appeared on Tang Wu's face. The stall is so big. Can you take care of it all? There were only so many disciples in each clan. Thus, during the Dragon Spring Conference, it was not always better to occupy as many mountain peaks as possible. If too many mountain peaks were occupied, the defensive power would become weak. For example, although Han Jiyu had strengthened the defense of the mountain peaks as much as possible, it was still weak compared to the enemy's attack power. Once the Green Feather Mountain attacked, the Tai Luo sect's chances of winning would be very small. I want to. What can you do? Han Jiyu gritted her teeth. In her anger, she issued a series of orders. A moment later, the scattered black light spots moved forward continuously to supplement the defensive power. Seeing this scene, Tang Wu's lips curled up slightly. Qin Wanli wanted to say something but stopped. He looked up and met Tang Wu's fierce gaze. Qin Wanli's mouth twitched and he did not dare to say anything. He was afraid that if he spoke, the blue light spots would change direction and attack the Qin clan's mountain peaks. Chapter 127. The nearby mountain peaks were in full swing. Looking from afar, one could see flashes of various colors and chaotic spirit energy fluctuations. The Green Feather Mountain sect had officially launched an attack on the Tai Luo sect. Furthermore, They had sent out 5 or 6 assault squads to attack the various mountain peaks. On each mountain peak, there were at least a few dozen people, and at most a few hundred people, engaged in fierce battle. Halfway up the mountain, Xie Jin's team was on standby. The 5 of them didn't make a single sound. They were just silently recovering and conserving their strength. Their task was very simple. They would wait for the enemy's hunting team. If the enemy's hunting team didn't show up, they would join forces with the nearest team to kill the enemy cultivators. The Qin family had been beaten until they were scared, so Green Feather Mountain had nothing to worry about. They could fight freely with Tai Luo sect. Half an hour after the battle began, Xie Jin suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "Let's go!" The 5 of them immediately got on their mounts. Lu Yi was in the lead, Xie Jin and Tao Tiangang were in the middle, and Song Xie and Xiao Qiao brought up the rear. At first, Xie Jin was in the lead, but in a battle a day ago, he was accidentally injured. The injury wasn't too serious, but it wasn't light either. It had affected his strength. In the end, they decided to let Lu Yi replace him. As a result, everyone was surprised to find that the following battles were much simpler than before. Lu Yi charged at the front and often caused casualties to the enemy. It was easy for their side to be outnumbered. Recalling the various scenes of fighting side by side in the past few days, they felt that Lu Ye's background was extraordinary. 5 people and 5 mounts rushed out with a rumbling sound. Xie Jin pointed the direction to Lu Yi. They didn't run to the top of the mountain, but to the other side of the mountain. Lu Yi understood that they were going to fight the enemy's hunting team. It seemed that they had a slight advantage in the battle at the top of the mountain. Otherwise, the enemy's hunting team wouldn't have come to support them. The enemy has 5 people, 2 5th order and 3 4th order. Xie Jin shouted behind Lu Yi, "One for you, one for me." Lu Yi nodded. Xiao Qiao laughed. "They really think highly of us?" In order to deal with Lu Ye's hunting team, the other side had actually dispatched 2 5th order masters, which clearly showed the importance Tai Luo sect attached to them. It was no wonder that Tai Luo sect was so cautious. The main reason was that Lu Ye's hunting team had killed too many enemy cultivators over the past few days, so no one dared to underestimate them. "They're coming towards us." Xie Jin roared again. There was no need for his reminder. Lu Yi, who was at the forefront, could vaguely see several figures rapidly closing the distance between them. Still 300 meters away, Lu Yi stared at the 5th order leader of this group. This man had a fierce look on his face and a small beard on his chin. He looked to be in his early 20s. Lu Yi raised his hand and cast a spell. However, due to the violent turbulence, the spell didn't hit its target. He fired a second shot. This time, his aim was much better, but his opponent ducked and dodged it. When the distance between them was less than 10 feet, Lu Yi slowly pulled out his long saber. Lu Yi didn't know what kind of monster beast his opponent was riding, but it looked like a lion or a tiger. When they passed by each other, Lu Yi raised his saber and chopped down at the 5th order master on his mount. When the other party dodged too far, his mount twisted and slammed into Hoopa. Hoopa roared. At the same time, Lu Yi felt a strong impact and was sent flying. He rolled a few times on the ground before he could regain his footing. He quickly swept his eyes around and found that everyone behind him was in the same situation. They were all knocked off their mounts and stood up awkwardly. They weren't the only ones, the enemy was the same. It seemed that the other party didn't want to fight them on their mounts. Lu Yi lowered his eyes slightly and gripped the long saber in his hand. It seemed that the other party was very confident in keeping them here. Where did their confidence come from? At this time, there was no time to think too much. After landing, Lu Yi rushed forward and slashed his saber at the 5th order master's neck before he could regain his footing. The other party hurriedly raised his arm to block. With a clanging sound, the saber enhanced with sharpness failed to cut off the other party's arm. Instead, it felt like it had hit a piece of metal. Lu Yi immediately understood that the other party was wearing an arm guard. No wonder he dared to take his saber head-on. This guy was most likely an individual cultivator. Although he wasn't very burly, his vitality was extremely strong. Moreover, his reaction was extremely fast. Before Lu Yi could withdraw his saber, the other party threw a punch at his chest. Lu Yi quickly retreated and drew his saber diagonally. An ear-piercing sound rang out as sparks flew. The small bearded man threw another punch. Lu Yi hurriedly blocked with his saber, but under the huge impact, he couldn't help but fall back a few steps. Bestial roars could be heard as the 10 mounts began to fight in pairs. Xie Jin and the others also found their own opponents and displayed their skills. "They're not fourth-order cultivators," Song Xie suddenly exclaimed. This shout really shocked everyone. The information Xie Jin received was sent by Tang Wu from the Shadow Moon Disk. The different colored light spots on the Shadow Moon Disk represented different forces, and from the color of the light spots, one could judge the cultivator's cultivation. This Tai Luo sect hunting team had 2 fifth-order cultivators and 3 fourth-order cultivators on the Shadow Moon Disk. Although this wasn't a weak lineup, Lu Yi and the others weren't afraid. Xie Jin was a fifth-order cultivator, so he could block one of them. Lu Yi even had a record of killing fifth-order cultivators. The others only needed to focus on their own targets. So, before the battle began, everyone was relatively relaxed. Even if they couldn't win, they wouldn't be in too much danger. But when they really fought, Song Xie was shocked to find that his target was actually a fifth-order cultivator. What frightened him even more was that his opponent was a Dharma cultivator. Song Xie couldn't get close to him at all and could only flee in embarrassment. But if this continued, he would die sooner or later. Another scream rang out. It was Tao Tiangang. Accompanied by this scream, his body couldn't help but retreat. There was a foot-long wound on his chest, and his flesh was torn apart. His opponent didn't spare him and pressed forward. Judging from the spirit energy fluctuations he released, this guy was also a fifth-order cultivator. Qiao suddenly panicked. Fortunately, her opponent was only a fourth-order cultivator and didn't reveal his fifth-order cultivation. But the current situation was extremely unfavorable for them. Originally, they thought there were only 2 fifth-order cultivators, but now there were 4. Even if the number of people was the same, it was still a crushing advantage. As long as either Song Xie or Tao Tiangang was defeated and killed, the enemy would be able to outnumber them and expand their advantage like a rolling snowball. In the hall, Tang Wu's face was solemn. He looked up at Han Jiyu. A woman's heart is really unpredictable. At this moment, he also knew that he had been schemed against. Tai Luo sect had a method to suppress one's cultivation. In fact, this method wasn't rare, but it was a little unusual for it to appear on a low-level cultivator. Ordinary spirit talismans didn't have this effect. The aura-concealing talisman would conceal all spirit energy, so it couldn't suppress one's cultivation at all. To achieve this effect, a special spirit inscription had to be used. Moreover, the spirit inscription had to be branded on the body. This required a spirit inscription master who was proficient in spirit inscriptions. The price to hire such a spirit inscription master was not small. Tai Luo sect didn't have such a person, so these 2 fifth-order cultivators must have been arranged by Tai Luo sect in advance. Taking them out at this time really caught Green Feather Mountain off guard. Han Jiyu was no longer as irritable as before. She covered her mouth and chuckled, "Men are really easy to deceive." She glanced at Tang Wu. "Do you think I don't know that the kid riding the tiger is in this hunting team?" Her previous performance was just to confuse Tang Wu. "Although you've made all sorts of arrangements to confuse me in the past few days, I've been keeping an eye on him. I know exactly where he is." Han Jiyu raised her slender jade finger and pointed at the location where the 2 hunting teams were fighting on the Shadow Moon Disk. The Qin family's heavy losses these past few days have a lot to do with this little brat. Such a person naturally needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. I will deal with your hunting team first. She slowly moved her finger up and pointed at the mountain peak where the blue and black dots were fighting. She continued, "After that, we'll reinforce this place. As long as we kill everyone here, our Tai Luo sect's assault team will be able to tear a hole in your defensive line. We'll charge straight in and attack your rear. When that time comes, we'll kill 1 on sight, kill 2 on sight. We'll kill you until you piss your pants in terror, ha." Tang Wu's expression was ugly because this was his original plan. As long as Xie Jin's team could defeat the opponent's hunting team, they could reinforce the nearby battle. In the battle over there, Green Feather Mountain already had a slight advantage. Once Xie Jin's team joined, this advantage would continue to expand. In the previous deployment, Han Jiyu had transferred many people from the rear of her territory to the front, which caused the rear defense to be extremely weak. As long as they could win the battle at the front of the mountain and kill enough enemies, the rear defense would be like paper to Green Feather Mountain. At that time, they could attack whichever mountain they wanted. Today's battle could be said to be the most important battle in the entire Dragon Spring League. If they won, everything would be fine. If they lost, there would be no turning back. This was the case for both sides. He had thought that it was a mistake for Han Jiyu to transfer the cultivators from the rear to the front, but now it seemed that this woman had already seen through everything. Her previous exasperation was just a cover. She allowed Tang Wu to make all kinds of arrangements and then took advantage of the situation to turn his plan into her own. Tang Wu's eyelids twitched. He knew that he had underestimated Han Jiyu, and the price he had to pay for underestimating her was almost unbearable. On the side, Qin Wanli was also trembling with fear. Compared with Tang Wu and Han Jiyu, these two cunning guys, he felt that he was an innocent little rabbit. If the Qin family wanted to rise, it would be a long way to go. Chapter 128. The two hunting teams had only fought for a moment, but Lu Yi and the others were already at a disadvantage. Tao Tiangang was injured, and Song Xie was forced to flee. It was only a matter of time before he was defeated and killed. Although Qiao Qiao Er's side was stable for the time being, it was of no help to the overall situation. As for Xie Jin, he was injured, so it was already good enough that he could entangle his opponent. The situation was extremely bad for Lu Yi and the others. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before Tao Tiangang or Song Xie were killed. At that time, the situation would be irreversible. I have to break out of this situation. Lu Ye's mind raced as he slashed out with his saber, forcing the mustached body cultivator to retreat. At the same time, he raised his hand and summoned his small bell spirit artifact. Pouring his spirit energy into it, the small bell flew out with a whoosh. In the blink of an eye, it grew in size and slammed down on the fifth-order cultivator. The reason why he chose this body cultivator was mainly because the other party had been standing in place and casting spells, making it difficult to dodge. Moreover, if he used the small bell spirit artifact to trap him, the body cultivator wouldn't be able to escape. If he wasn't careful, he might accidentally injure himself while casting spells. With a bang, the small bell shone on the body cultivator. Song Xie was dodging with all his strength at this time. Seeing that the body cultivator was trapped, a trace of struggle and hesitation flashed across his face. He turned around and rushed towards Tao Tiangang. He didn't know how long the small bell spirit artifact could trap the opponent, but there was no doubt that this was an opportunity. As long as he could join forces with Tao Tiangang, even if he couldn't defeat Tao Tiangang's opponent, he could at least hold on for a while. He just had the idea of taking the opportunity to escape, but he quickly dismissed it because he knew that if the others were killed, he wouldn't be able to survive. Instead of running away, he might as well fight with all his might. With his help, Tao Tiangang's side finally stabilized. With the two of them working together, they could entangle the fifth-order cultivator for a while. On the other side, after summoning the small bell spirit artifact, Lu Yi rushed towards the mustached body cultivator, slashing with his saber. However, the other party simply raised his arms in front of his body and blocked all of Lu Ye's attacks without retaliating. Seeing this, Lu Yi raised his hand and cast a spell. His fat bird slammed into the man's chest and exploded. The man's face was immediately burned, but he seemed to be wearing some kind of defensive equipment under his clothes. Lu Ye's spell's attacks intended effect. He staggered back a few steps and gritted his teeth. Amazing! Even with the difference of an entire origin realm, Yang Kai was only able to parry Lu Ye's attacks, demonstrating just how strong his enemy was. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Yi kicked out at him. With a furious roar, the blood qi in his body surged, and a bloody mist appeared on the surface of his body. Aiming at Lu Ye's foot, he punched out. The moment the spiritual energy collided, the two figures fell back. Lu Yi felt the soles of his feet go numb, and he almost couldn't stand steadily. The small bearded body cultivator wasn't any better. Lu Ye's kick directly knocked him to the ground. Before he could get up, Lu Yi had already rushed over, the long blade in his hand chopping down like a storm. The body cultivator roared angrily. His spiritual power merged with his qi and blood, and the blood mist around his body became even thicker. However, as Lu Yi slashed down with the sharpness spirit inscriptions, the defense faded at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not far away, the small bell spirit artifact began to ring violently, and the luster of the spirit belt around it was rapidly fading. It wouldn't be long before the trapped fifth-order cultivator broke free. At that time, the opportunity Lu Yi had fought so hard for would be gone. I have to kill this body cultivator as soon as possible. Only then will I have a chance to survive. Lu Ye's heart was filled with hatred. Almost without hesitation, he swung his blade again and again, but every strike was blocked by the body cultivator. Even if he managed to land a hit, he couldn't hurt his opponent's vitals. The light on the surface of the small bell spirit artifact grew dimmer and dimmer, almost disappearing. "You're dead." Although the body cultivator was being suppressed, he was still grinning. He could see the anxiety in Lu Ye's eyes, so he knew that once his companion broke free, it would be his side's victory. This was why he could only take a beating without fighting back. The situation was in their favor, so he didn't need to take any risks. All he needed to do was stabilize himself. As Lu Yi slashed down with his blade again, the bracer worn by the body cultivator's arm shattered, startling him. He had long heard that this man riding a tiger had a powerful spirit artifact, so he had put on a large number of protective gear to fight him. His main purpose was to delay his opponent, but he had still underestimated him. It could be said that Tai Luo sect had chosen him to deal with Lu Yi. Seeing Lu Yi slash down again, the body cultivator no longer dared to meet the attack head-on and instead reached out to his storage bag, obviously wanting to take out a spirit talisman. At this time, the talisman he wanted to take out would definitely be a defensive one, most likely a golden body talisman. However, at that moment, his shoulder suddenly sank and a sharp whistling sound rang out in his ear. This sound was extremely strange, and when it rang out, it made him feel a little dizzy and absent-minded. He hurriedly activated his qi and blood force and spirit force, and the thin blood mist suddenly became thicker. A mournful scream came from behind him. He didn't know who had ambushed him, but he knew that he had injured the other party. Seeing Yi's figure on the bearded body cultivator's shoulder suddenly dim, Lu Ye's expression became ferocious and he slashed down with his blade. Yi hadn't shown up in the past few days of fighting, mainly because she didn't have a physical body and could only play a limited role. However, at this critical moment, she had resolutely chosen to take action, creating an excellent opportunity for Lu Yi. The body cultivator had just taken out a spirit talisman from his storage bag, but before he could circulate his spirit qi, the blade had already fallen. The bracer had already been cut to pieces, so there was nothing left to block the sharp blade. This blade broke through the body cultivator's protective spirit qi and directly cut through the arm holding the spirit talisman. It then broke through the blood mist and cut into the body cultivator's neck, causing blood to splatter everywhere. The bearded body cultivator let out a muffled groan as the severe pain caused him to grit his teeth. The injury to his arm caused him to lose focus, but in this life-and-death crisis, he managed to grab Lu Ye's wrist with his other hand and resist this ferocious slash. Lu Yi took a step forward and raised his other hand, grasping the tip of the blade and pressing it down fiercely. The two were so close together that their eyes met. Qi. The sound of the blade cutting through flesh rang out and blood spurted out. The bearded body cultivator's eyes widened as he knelt in front of Lu Yi, his mouth squirming as if he wanted to say something. Schwa. With a loud sound, the sharp blade cut through the bearded body cultivator's entire neck. The headless corpse swayed and fell to the ground. A fifth-order body cultivator, dead. Just as Lu Yi and Yi were working together to kill the fifth-order body cultivator, the small bell spirit artifact was finally on the verge of collapse and the light on its surface was about to be annihilated. Lu Yi wiped the blood from his face and looked around. He saw Xie Jin being beaten back by his opponent, and Tao Tiangang and Song Xie working together to struggle against another fifth-order body cultivator. Originally, the two of them working together wouldn't have been so difficult, but the main reason was that Tao Tiangang was already seriously injured before Song Xie came to support them. As a result, the situation was naturally very unfavorable for them. He also saw Qiao Qiao shaking her whip and fighting against the fourth-order body cultivator. It was difficult to tell who had the upper hand. Without hesitation, he rushed towards the small bell spirit artifact. When he was close, he stretched out his hand and the small bell spirit artifact immediately flew back to him. Bang. A spell suddenly bloomed and hit the air. It was the spell cultivator who had been trapped inside. Suddenly regaining his freedom, the spell cultivator couldn't help but laugh. In order to escape, he had gone all out. In that narrow space, he had used a spell, causing himself to be covered in cuts and bruises. Fortunately, he had a sense of propriety, so although he looked a little embarrassed, he wasn't seriously injured. Just as he was about to escape, a bright blade flashed in front of him. Before the spell cultivator could understand the situation, Lu Ye's blade had already broken through his protective spirit energy. Under the powerful chop, the head that was still blooming with a smile on his face flew high into the air. He didn't expect that in the short time he was trapped, a fifth-order body cultivator from his family would die. Moreover, it was the most durable body cultivator. How could a defenseless spell cultivator like him block such a sudden attack? In an instant, the situation changed. Only 2 of the 4 fifth-order body cultivators from Tai Luosek's hunting team were left. This sudden change not only shocked their companions, but also Xie Jin and the others. However, this was quickly followed by ecstasy. They had thought that this was a fight to the death, but who would have thought that there would be such a turn of events? A fourth-order body cultivator had killed 2 fifth-order body cultivators. Sure enough, only such a ferocious guy could break through Tai Luosek's defensive line alone. Lu Yi had already rushed towards Qiao Qiao with his blade. The reason why he chose this side was because a fourth-order body cultivator was easier to kill. He had just killed 2 fifth-order body cultivators and his spirit energy was in turmoil. He needed to calm down a little. Moreover, the long whip in Qiao Qiao's hand was very suitable for him. After fighting for the past few days, they had formed a certain level of tacit understanding, so when she saw Lu Yi charging towards her, Qiao Qiao immediately retreated. Seeing his 2 senior brothers die in battle, the fourth-order origin realm cultivator who was fighting against her had long been frightened out of his wits. Seizing this opportunity, he naturally turned around and fled, but before he could even take 2 steps, a whip cracked behind him and wrapped around his neck. Qiao Qiao pulled fiercely, pulling the man into the air. The fourth-order body cultivator waved the weapon in his hand and slashed at the long whip behind him. Before he could land a solid blow, Qiao Qiao had already retrieved the long whip. He landed on the ground in a sorry state. When he looked up, Lu Ye's figure was already imprinted in his eyes. Facing the blade that was coming straight at him, he hurriedly raised his weapon to block. However, his legs were already bound by the long whip. A strong force passed through him, causing him to lose his balance. Lu Ye's blade had already landed on his body. Go help him. Lu Yi turned around and left, charging towards Xie Jin. Qiao Qiao whipped the head of the fourth-order body cultivator lying on the ground and shouted, "Help which side?" Lu Yi did not have the time to reply to her. At this moment he had already charged into the battle and joined forces with Xie Jin to fight the fifth-order body cultivator. At this moment, the fifth-order body cultivator's face was filled with despair and his expression was extremely strange. It was unknown whether he wanted to cry or laugh, but the power of his attacks was becoming more and more ruthless. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.